Before dawn on June 6, 1944, the coast of Normandy was still hidden in darkness. The sea was cold, the sky was low, and across the English Channel thousands of men waited inside ships, aircraft, landing craft and quiet compartments, not yet knowing exactly how history would remember that morning. Some stood on wet decks with collars turned up against the wind. Some sat shoulder to shoulder in landing craft, listening to the water slap against metal. Some waited beside aircraft on dark airfields in England, where the grass was damp, the runway lights were low, and the night smelled of fuel, rain, oil, canvas, wool, and nervous silence. Some checked equipment for the third time. Some held letters. Some drank coffee that had gone lukewarm. Some said very little. Some tried to sleep and could not. Some did sleep briefly, because the body sometimes takes rest even when the mind is full. Tonight, we are going to tell the story of D-Day and the Battle of Normandy. But not as noise, not as a battlefield spectacle, not as a story of shouting, shock and sudden violence. We will tell it slowly, carefully, humanly, as a long historical night becoming morning, as a story of ships in darkness, aircraft under cloud, maps under low lamps, quiet villages behind blacked-out windows, wet boots, folded letters, tired medics, radio operators, engineers, sailors, paratroopers, infantrymen, and ordinary people in Normandy waiting behind closed shutters while the largest invasion fleet of the war approached through the Grey Sea. This is a story of Operation Overlord, the Allied operation to open a Western front in Europe. It began with D-Day, the landings of June 6, 1944. But the Battle of Normandy did not end on that first day. That is the quieter, often forgotten truth. The world remembers the beaches, Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, Sword. The names are carved into history, but behind those beaches were fields, hedgerows, orchards, roads, farmhouses, church towers, stone villages, flooded meadows, bridges, crossroads, hospitals, supply lines, signals, letters, and weeks of slow movement through the Norman countryside. Tonight we will begin before the first light, before the beaches became famous, before the photographs, before the maps were redrawn, before the morning became one of the most remembered mornings of the 20th century. We begin in the night before, the night of waiting, the night when history was already moving but the coast was still dark. If you are listening to rest, there is nothing you need to do. You do not need to memorize every unit or every hour. You do not need to hold the whole operation in your mind. Let the facts pass gently, like distant lights through fog. Let the story carry you. At first, it may hold a little more historical shape, because the beginning must gather the world. Then slowly, as the night moves into morning, and morning moves inland, the story will become softer, more human, more atmospheric, until finally Normandy itself becomes a quiet landscape of memory, rain, fields, old stone, and rest. So settle in, let your shoulders soften, let your hands rest, let your breathing come naturally. There is nothing urgent here now, only the slow telling of a night when many people waited, not yet inside memory, but inside the present moment. The English coast was dark under wartime discipline. Ports, harbours, airfields, roads, camps, and assembly areas were filled with movement, but much of that movement happened under lowered light. The Great Invasion had been planned for months, shaped by weather, deception, logistics, command decisions, tides, moonlight, and the enormous practical difficulty of moving an army across the sea. Operation Overlord was not simply a plan drawn on a map. It was a vast system of human labour, ships loaded with equipment, landing craft gathered in harbours, trucks moving along dark roads, men checking rifles, radios, ropes, medical bags, maps, compasses, rations, life belts, boots, helmets, and personal items, engineers preparing obstacles to be overcome, sailors preparing channels to be crossed, airmen preparing the night sky, paratroopers preparing to land behind the beaches, commanders watching weather reports, meteorologists studying pressure systems over the Atlantic, clerks typing orders, drivers waiting in long lines of vehicles, cooks serving meals to men who are hungry, not hungry, or too tired to know, military police directing traffic through wet roads, mechanics working under lamps, chaplains speaking softly, doctors and nurses making final arrangements, and everywhere, the quiet knowledge that the next day would not be ordinary. The weather had already delayed the operation. The first planned date had not held. The channel was rough, the sky uncertain, the wind too strong, the sea too heavy. In an operation this large, weather was not background. Weather was destiny. A storm could scatter landing craft. Cloud could complicate air support. Poor visibility could confuse ships. Tides could expose or hide beach obstacles. Moonlight mattered for airborne troops. The sea itself had to be crossed by men who had never seen anything like the fleet gathering around them. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, had to make the decision under uncertainty. No commander could command the weather. He could only listen to those who studied it, weigh the risks and choose. A small break in the weather appeared. Not perfect, not gentle, but possible. And possible was enough. The order was given, the invasion would go. Across southern England, the night deepened around that decision. Imagine an airfield, somewhere in England. The grass wet under boots, the silhouettes of transport aircraft lined against the dark. Men of the airborne divisions waiting with heavy equipment, faces shadowed beneath helmets, parachutes fitted, hands checking straps by habit. The aircraft smell of metal, fuel, canvas, oil, and cold air. Engines have not yet fully taken the sky, but the field already feels alive with what is coming. A man tightens one strap, another adjusts a helmet, another touches the pocket where a letter rests. Another looks toward the darkness beyond the runway, where nothing can be seen but the low shape of cloud and the faint suggestion of night. In a few hours, some of these men will land behind the Normandy beaches, near Sainte-Mère-Église, near bridges, roads, causeways, and fields. Their task will be to disrupt, secure, confuse, hold, and open the way for the forces coming from the sea. But in this moment, before takeoff, the world is smaller. A gloved hand, a buckle, a breath. The vibration of engines beginning somewhere down the line. A quiet joke. A man looking at another man and nodding. No speech could contain the scale of what was about to happen. So the body returned to small things. Check the strap, check the pocket, check the equipment, stand when told, board when told, wait. At the harbours, the sea made its own sound. The channel water moved against hulls, piers, ropes, pilings, and landing craft. Ships were gathered in extraordinary numbers: warships, troop transports, landing craft, minesweepers, support vessels, command ships, supply ships. The invasion fleet was not only a military force, it was a floating city of purpose, a city without streets, spread across dark water. Men moved carefully where decks were wet. Cargo was secured, engines warmed, signals passed, ramps were checked, compasses and charts were studied. A sailor leaned against a rail for a moment and looked at the Black Sea, perhaps thinking how ordinary water could become the road to history. A soldier in a crowded landing craft might not see much of the larger fleet. He might see only the shapes closest to him: a wall of metal, a helmet near his shoulder, a coil of rope, a dark sky above, the pale face of another man under a helmet, a hand holding a small object, the faint glow of a covered light, the smell of diesel, the low heave of the craft, the sound of water. The body knows history through closeness, not through maps at first, through what is near enough to touch: a wet sleeve, a cold canteen, a boot against the floor, a rifle held carefully, a life belt pressed around the body, a ration packet, a folded letter, a prayer book, a photograph, a cigarette not yet lit, a silence shared by many men who have nothing useful to say. On the command side, the operation was immense. Operation Neptune was the naval assault phase of Operation Overlord, carrying troops across the Channel and placing them on the beaches. Overlord was the larger campaign to establish a lodgment in Normandy and begin the liberation of Western Europe. D-Day was the first day, the first crossing, the first landing, the morning that people remember, but in the darkness before it, all names still pointed forward. Overlord, Neptune, D-Day, Normandy, names waiting to become lived reality. In headquarters rooms, maps were spread under electric light. The Normandy coast was marked with beach sectors: Utah to the west, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, Sword to the east. Beyond them, towns and roads: Carentan, Bayeux, Caen, Saint-Lô, Cherbourg farther to the northwest, bridges, rivers, rail lines, villages, fields. The maps were precise in the way military maps must be precise, but no map can fully hold a place. A line on paper marked a beach, but the real beach was wet sand, shingle, obstacles, tide, wind, smoke, fear, shouted orders, and men trying to move forward. A road on paper was not only a road, it was mud at the edges, a stone wall, a ditch, a farm gate, an old bicycle leaning behind a house, a dog barking in a village, a woman behind a curtain listening, a church bell that might not ring. A map turns the world into symbols so decisions can be made. But the world itself remains richer, harder, stranger, and more human than symbols. Tonight's story will keep returning to that difference, the map and the world, the plan and the lived moment, the famous beach and the small human detail, the operation and the individual, the army and the man holding a cold mug in both hands. As the night advanced, thousands of men across southern England waited to cross. American, British, Canadian, and other Allied forces. Soldiers from many places gathered for one enormous effort. Some had trained for months, some had already seen combat, some were young enough that the night must have felt unreal. They had practiced landings, they had studied photographs and models, they had been briefed, equipped, inspected, loaded. They had learned names that would soon become real: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword. But before dawn, those names were still mostly sounds. A man assigned to Omaha might know the word. He might know what he had been told. He might know the plan. But the actual beach was still across the dark water, a place hidden by distance, a place waiting. On the French side of the channel, Normandy slept uneasily. The villages near the coast were not untouched by war. Occupation had changed daily life. German forces were present. Defences had been built. Coastal batteries, bunkers, obstacles, mines, strongpoints, barbed wire, and fields of fire formed part of the Atlantic Wall. But behind those defences were also farms, churches, orchards, fields, kitchens, barns, lanes, wells, stone walls, and families. Normandy was not only a military objective, it was a home. Imagine a village inland from the coast. The houses built of pale stone, roofs dark under the night, a narrow street, a church tower rising against cloud, a garden wall, apple trees moving slightly in the wind, a shutter closed, a candle or small lamp hidden carefully behind fabric, a family sleeping lightly or not sleeping at all. Somewhere, a cow shifts in a stable. Somewhere, rainwater gathers in a barrel. Somewhere, an old woman wakes before dawn because old people often do, and listens to the silence. She does not know exactly what is coming, but perhaps she feels that the air is different. War teaches people to listen, to engines, to distant aircraft, to boots, to roads, to pauses, to sudden absences of sound. On that night, many in Normandy may have heard aircraft overhead before they understood. The sky began to fill, transport planes, gliders, bombers, fighters. The airborne part of the operation moved first through the darkness. From English airfields, aircraft rose one after another, carrying paratroopers toward the Cotentin Peninsula and other inland objectives. In the sky, the experience was not romantic. It was cramped, loud, cold. The aircraft vibrated. Men sat close together, equipment heavy, faces dim in the low interior light. The engines made conversation difficult. Some men closed their eyes. Some checked gear again. Some stared at the floor. Some looked toward the small windows and saw only dark cloud, a red light, a green light not yet. The waiting inside an aircraft before a jump is its own small world. The body knows it is moving through the night at speed. The mind tries to stay with procedure. When the time comes, stand, hook up, check equipment, wait for the signal, step into air. But before all of that, there is the long drone of engines, the vibration through boots and legs, the smell of canvas and fuel, the private silence inside each man. The Normandy countryside below was dark, broken by rivers, fields, orchards, marshes, roads, and hedgerows. The airborne landings were scattered in many places because night, weather, anti-aircraft fire, confusion, and the realities of navigation made precision difficult. Some men landed far from intended drop zones. Some came down in fields, some near villages, some near flooded areas, some near Sainte-Mère-Église, the town that would become one of the remembered names of D-Day. But in this first block, we stay before the full arrival. We feel the aircraft crossing the coast. The engines over darkness, the moon behind cloud, the lowland below, the small villages unaware of exactly where each parachute will fall. Farther out at sea, the invasion fleet moved, ships crossing the channel in darkness and rough water. The weather was not kind. Many men became seasick. This too is part of the human truth of D-Day. Not only courage, not only strategy. Bodies in crowded landing craft, cold, wet, nauseated, waiting. A man can be part of the largest amphibious invasion in history and still be thinking of his stomach, his boots, and the smell of diesel. That does not make the moment smaller. It makes it real. Inside a landing craft, the world narrowed. Metal sides, a ramp at the front, water striking the hull, the engine's vibration, men pressed close, equipment heavy, some silent, some whispering, some praying, some sleeping in brief, strange fragments. A sergeant checking faces, a young soldier staring down at his hands, another touching the small Bible in his pocket, another thinking of a farm in Iowa, a street in London, a town in Canada, a kitchen in Scotland, a mother's voice, a brother, a wife, a child, a train station, a letter. The mind travels when the body cannot. The body sits in metal on a cold sea. The mind returns home. Then the boat shifts, someone speaks, water hits hard, and the mind returns to the channel. The first minutes of a long operation are often made of waiting. Waiting to load, waiting to depart, waiting for the sea to cross, waiting for aircraft to arrive, waiting for the signal, waiting for dawn. Waiting can be difficult because nothing has happened yet, but everything is coming. For a sleep story, waiting is a place we can enter gently, not to create anxiety, but to feel the humanity of the night. A hand around a mug, a helmet resting against metal, a blanket around shoulders on a ship, a radio operator leaning towards static, a medic checking bandages, a chaplain moving quietly between men, a sailor watching the black water, a pilot checking the faint glow of instruments, a paratrooper listening to engines, a Norman villager turning in bed as aircraft pass overhead. Across the channel, the sea itself was restless. It lifted the ships and landing craft sometimes sharply. It threw spray. It made ramps and decks wet. It made men cold and sick. The sea did not care about plans. The channel had its own rhythm, a wave, a drop, a rise, a fall, a slap of water against metal, a pause, another wave. For the men crossing, this rhythm became the sound before history, not the sound of speeches, not the sound of victory, the sound of water against boats in the dark. In the air above, engines made a different rhythm, a deep, continuous drone, aircraft crossing toward France, bombers and transports, gliders towed into the night. The sky itself seemed to be moving. On the ground in Normandy, those who woke to the sound may have listened without fully understanding. Some had heard aircraft before, some had learned to distinguish types of movement, or thought they had. But this was different in scale. The air was full, and still, for many civilians, the safest response was to stay inside, listen, wait, and hope the night would pass. Behind closed shutters, a mother might sit up in bed. A father might move quietly to the window but not open it. A child might wake and ask what the sound was. Someone might whisper, "Aircraft." Someone else might say, "Stay away from the window." A candle might be blown out. A prayer might begin silently. Normandy was about to become the doorway of Western Europe's liberation. But to the people who lived there, it was also the place where their homes stood. This double truth must remain in the script. Military history and civilian life at the same time, the grand operation and the quiet kitchen. The map arrow and the child under a blanket. The beach objective and the village baker who cannot sleep. The story of Normandy is not only soldiers landing, it is also a region waking into enormous history. Back in England, the command structure had done all it could before the crossing. Plans had been made in extraordinary detail. Deception operations had helped mislead German expectations about where the main landing might come, especially through the larger deception effort known as Operation Bodyguard. including the false impression of an invasion near Pas-de-Calais. Inflatable equipment, fake radio traffic, double agents, and careful misdirection all formed part of the hidden side of the invasion. This is one of the untold layers that matters, not secret in the sense of fantasy, but less visible than the beaches. Before men crossed the channel, another war had already been fought in information. Where would the landing come? When? How large? Was Normandy the main attack or a diversion? Could the Allies convince German command that another landing was still coming elsewhere? The success of D-Day depended not only on courage at the beaches, but on months of deception, planning, engineering, logistics, weather forecasting, and secrecy. A sleep story can hold these layers calmly. The false armies that existed on paper and in enemy imagination. The radio signals meant to be heard. The careful protection of information. The tension of knowing that surprise, even partial surprise, could save lives. Yet for the man in the landing craft, all of that remained far away. He did not live inside the full intelligence picture. He lived inside a boat, a dark sea, a sick stomach, a heavy pack, a wet sleeve, a waiting ramp. This is how large operations become human. From above, Operation Overlord is vast. From inside, it is one breath after another. As the fleet moved, minesweepers worked ahead, clearing paths through the channel. This was dangerous, careful, unglamorous work. A cleared channel is invisible when it succeeds. No great monument stands in the water to mark the patience of those crews. But without such work, the invasion fleet could not move as it did. Here again is an untold human layer. Minesweepers under darkness. Sailors focused on a task that had to be done before others could arrive. The quiet courage of preparation. In every major event, there are people whose success is meant to be unnoticed. The road is open, the channel is cleared, the fuel arrives, the signal works, the bridge holds, the wounded are carried, the meal is ready, the map is correct, the tide is understood. History often remembers the first visible line, but behind it are thousands of quiet tasks. For our script, we will remember them, not all at once, but enough to make the story feel full. The night before, D-Day was full of such unseen work. Engineers preparing equipment, naval crews guiding craft, pilots and navigators watching instruments, airborne troops waiting for jump lights, radio operators handling traffic, medics checking supplies, military police controlling columns, sailors keeping ships in order, commanders reading updates, meteorologists hoping the weather window would hold. And in the middle of all of it, ordinary men trying to remain steady. The coast of Normandy remained dark. German defenders along the coast knew invasion was possible, but not exactly when and where the main blow would fall. Weather conditions had suggested that an invasion might be unlikely. Many assumptions were being tested by the night itself. Some defenders were at posts, some were in bunkers, some were inland, some were resting, some were uncertain. Again, we keep the story human without glorifying any side. War places human beings in systems of command, fear, duty, ideology, coercion, belief and circumstance. A calm historical narration does not need to simplify all of them into symbols, but it does need to remain clear in moral direction. The Allied landings were part of the liberation of occupied Western Europe from Nazi Germany. That wider purpose matters. And yet, when we describe the night, we do not need hatred in the voice. We need clarity, sobriety, and human detail. The war is present, the danger is real, but the narration remains calm. As the hours moved toward dawn, the invasion became irreversible. The ships were already moving, the aircraft were already crossing, the paratroopers were approaching the drop zones, the landing craft were riding the sea. The coast was closer, closer, closer. In one landing craft, a man might feel time slow. The channel crossing could feel endless. He might try to remember instructions. He might forget them, then remember again. He might look at the man beside him and notice water on his helmet. He might smell diesel so strongly that it seemed to fill his whole body. He might hear someone retching quietly. He might feel ashamed of being afraid, and then realize everyone was afraid in some private way. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is movement while fear is present. But in our sleep story, we do not need to say this loudly. We show it through stillness. Through a man tightening a strap with shaking fingers. through another holding a letter in a waterproof cover, through another staring at the ramp because the ramp is the only thing ahead, through a medic touching the bag at his side, checking it by feel, through a sailor moving down the line with practiced calm, through the boat rising and falling. In another vessel, an officer looks at his watch under a covered light. The time matters. Everything has times. Hour, tide, approach, landing, support, fire plans, airborne drops, naval gunfire, movement inland, but watches cannot make the sea smoother. Time is precise. Experience is not. A minute can feel long in darkness. An hour can vanish in work. A whole night can become a series of small images that return for years. The low light on a face, the sound of engines, a wet rope, the smell of coffee, a prayer murmured into a collar, a hand tapping a rhythm without noticing, the first pale suggestion of dawn beyond the clouds. The story approaches that dawn but does not rush. Because the night before, D-Day is not only a prelude, it is part of the event itself. The waiting shaped the men, the crossing shaped the morning, the rough sea shaped the landings, the weather shaped the plan, the darkness shaped the airborne drops, the secrecy shaped the shock, the human body, tired before the first step on the beach, shaped everything that followed. On the English side, some rooms were already becoming empty. Camps where men had waited were quieter now. Roads that had been crowded began to clear. Harbours that had been packed with movement shifted as ships left. Airfields watched aircraft disappear into cloud and darkness. A mechanic might stand beside the runway after the last aircraft took off, listening to the drone fade. A nurse might prepare for casualties that had not yet arrived. A clerk might file a document and realise the operation was no longer theoretical. A cook might clean a pot after serving men who are now at sea. The absence after departure is its own kind of silence. A place that held many men suddenly holds their traces. A cigarette end, a muddy footprint, a forgotten scrap of paper, a dented mug, a blanket folded badly, a door left open. Departure leaves small evidence behind. In Normandy, the opposite was happening. The traces had not yet arrived, but the air was filling with their approach. Aircraft overhead, distant engine sounds, a sense of pressure before the first visible wave. The villagers slept and listened. The coast waited. The tide moved. The obstacles on the beaches stood in the dark water and wet sand. The German positions faced the sea. The Allied fleet approached through grey water. History was becoming physical. Wood, steel, flesh, weather, sand, stone, tide. No longer only maps. Soon the beach names would become lived places. Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, Sword. Each with its own geography, conditions, units, outcomes and memories. Each with its own human stories. But before we reach them, let the first block settle in the Great Crossing. The operation has begun. The night is alive with movement. The airfields have emptied into the sky. The harbours have released the fleet. The channel carries ships toward France. The paratroopers are nearing the dark land. The commanders have made the decision. The weather window holds, imperfectly. The sea is rough, but passable. The men are tired before morning. The coast is still hidden. This is the calm centre of the first part of the story. Not calm because nothing is happening. Calm because we tell it slowly. Because we allow the details to breathe. Because we understand that even the largest operation in history was made of small moments inside individual lives. A man presses a folded letter deeper into his pocket. Another pulls his collar higher. Another closes his eyes for 10 seconds and sees home. A sailor wipes spray from his face. A pilot watches instrument glow. A paratrooper feels the aircraft shake beneath him. A radio operator hears static. A medic counts bandages. A villager in Normandy wakes and listens. A commander looks at a map. A landing craft rises and falls. The sea carries them all. Toward dawn, toward Normandy, toward the beaches, toward the long battle that would not end in one day. If you're listening now, you may let the images pass slowly. The dark channel, the low sky, the ships moving in lines through the night, the aircraft crossing above cloud, the wet deck, the dim lamp, the folded map, the cold hands, the quiet waiting. You do not need to hurry with them. The story will continue. The coast will appear. The first light will come. The beaches will be named. The battle will move inland into villages, roads, and hedgerows. But for now, remain with the night before, The night when Operation Overlord became real. The night when D-Day was still ahead. The night when the coast of Normandy was hidden, the sea was dark, and thousands of ordinary men moved slowly toward an extraordinary morning. The engines continue. The water strikes the hull. The aircraft drone overhead. The lamps stay low, the maps lie open. The wind moves across the channel. And the story, quietly, carefully, follows the invasion fleet toward the grey line of dawn. The crossing of the channel was not a single movement. It was thousands of movements happening together in darkness, engines turning, ships holding formation, landing craft rising and falling, aircraft droning overhead, minesweepers working ahead, signals passing from vessel to vessel, men trying to rest while the sea refused to stay still. The channel itself was not wide compared with the great oceans of the world, but on that night it became an entire universe, a grey, restless, narrow sea carrying the weight of a continent's hope. Between England and Normandy, the water moved under wind and cloud, lifting the smaller craft, throwing spray across metal, making decks wet and cold, and reminding everyone aboard that even the most carefully planned operations still had to pass through weather. Operation Overlord had become more than orders. It had become motion. The ships were underway, the aircraft were in the sky. The men were no longer waiting in camps, roads and harbours. They were crossing. And crossing is a special state. Not here, not there. No longer in the world that was familiar, not yet in the world that was waiting, only between. A soldier inside a landing craft could feel that in-between state in his whole body. England was behind him, though he might not be able to see it anymore. France was ahead, though still hidden in darkness. The sea was below, the sky above, the metal walls close, men on both sides, no room to walk, no comfortable way to sit, no clear way to think beyond the next hour, the next wave, the next command. The craft moved with the water, rising, dropping, shuddering and pushing forward. The smell of diesel hung thick in the air. Some men were seasick. Some leaned forward silently. Some closed their eyes. Some tried to talk and found that the engine noise swallowed most words. Some stared at the ramp at the front, that plain metal shape that would later become the doorway into history. For now, the ramp remained closed. A wall, a promise, a question. The sea struck it again and again. Beyond it was darkness. In other craft, men checked equipment by touch. A strap, a buckle, a canteen, a rifle, a radio, a medical pouch, a coil of rope, a pack too heavy, a helmet rim wet with spray. Everything had weight. Everything had edges. Everything had to be kept close. In training, equipment could feel practical. On the crossing, it could feel personal. This was what a man carried into the unknown. Not the whole war, not the whole plan, only what was on his back, in his hands, at his belt, in his pockets, and inside his mind. A letter folded and sealed, a photograph in oilskin, a small religious medal, a pencil, a packet of cigarettes, a piece of chocolate, a memory of breakfast in England, a voice from home, a promise made casually, now remembered seriously. The invasion fleet moved around them in darkness, but many men could see only fragments of it. A shape passing nearby, a light covered quickly, a dark mast, a funnel, a larger ship looming and then fading, the wake of another craft, the sudden white of spray. The sense, more than the sight, of many vessels moving in the same direction. Those who could see more from larger ships understood the scale better. A fleet spread across the channel, organised into lanes, routes, timings and destinations, moving toward 5 beaches on the Normandy coast, Utah and Omaha for the American forces in the west, Golden Sword for the British forces in the east, Juno for the Canadians between them. 5 names, 5 beaches, 5 openings in the Atlantic Wall. But on the water before dawn, even the names seemed to wait. They were not yet images, they were instructions, destinations, words spoken in briefings, words printed on maps, words carried in the mind. Soon they would become sand, shingle, surf, obstacles, smoke, shouting and movement. But not yet. For now they were beyond the dark line ahead. Above the fleet, the air war moved through its own layers. Transport aircraft carried paratroopers inland. Gliders crossed behind tow planes, silent or nearly silent compared with the engines that pulled them. Bombers moved toward assigned targets. Fighters patrolled and prepared. The sky, like the sea, was crowded and yet lonely for each individual crew. Inside a transport aircraft, the airborne troops sat under dim light, packed with equipment, feeling the vibration of the engines through the floor and their bones. The air was cold. The smell was fuel, metal, canvas, oil, sweat, and damp wool. No one had much space. Parachute harnesses pressed against bodies. Weapons and packs made every movement difficult. A man's knee touched another man's knee. Shoulders leaned close. Faces appeared briefly in dim light, then vanished again into shadow. Some men tried to smile. Some stared at their hands. Some closed their eyes and rested their heads against the aircraft wall. The red light glowed. Not yet. Not yet. Not yet. The waiting inside the aircraft was different from the waiting inside the landing craft. At sea, the men felt the heave of water. In the air, they felt vibration and speed. At sea, the ramp was the symbol. In the aircraft, it was the door. The open door that would become wind, night, and empty space. Until it opened, the men lived inside the engine drone. The drone could become hypnotic if the mind allowed it. A low, continuous sound. A sound so steady that thoughts began to move with it. Home, training, the next command. The man beside me, the strap, the door, the light, home again. Then the aircraft shifted in the air and the present returned sharply. Below them, Normandy lay in darkness. Fields, hedgerows, rivers, marshes, church towers, roads, causeways, farm lanes, small villages where some windows were dark and some people awake behind shutters. The airborne landings had important goals: secure causeways behind Utah Beach, seize or hold key bridges, disrupt German movement, create confusion, protect the flanks of the seaborne landings, help open the way inland. But from inside the aircraft, the goal was not a paragraph in a history book. It was the moment the light changed. When the green light came, men stood, moved, and stepped into the night. The drops were scattered in many places. That scattering is part of the real story. War does not unfold with the neatness of arrows on a briefing board. Aircraft flew through darkness, cloud, anti-aircraft fire, navigation challenges, and stress. Some paratroopers landed far from their intended zones. Some came down in fields, some in orchards, some near roads, some near flooded areas, some close to Sainte-Mère-Église, some alone, some in small groups trying to gather in the dark, listening for clickers, whispers, movement, and the signs of friend or danger. For this sleep story, we do not enter the sharpest moments. We stay with the atmosphere of scattered arrival, a parachute descending through low cloud, a field below silvered faintly by moonlight, a hedgerow rising like a dark wall, a church tower beyond the trees, a man landing hard in wet grass, breathing for a moment, gathering himself, listening. The parachute silk settling nearby, the sound of distant engines fading overhead, a cow shifting somewhere in a field, a dog barking once, a whispered name, a hand finding a knife to cut lines, a man kneeling to collect equipment. The vast operation becomes suddenly small, one field. One man, one dark hedge, one direction to find. Another paratrooper lands near an orchard, apple trees around him, black against a slightly lighter sky. The grass is wet. He smells earth, leaves, and damp wool. For a few seconds, there is no battle in his immediate world, only breathing, the weight of gear, the need to gather himself. Then distant sounds return. Aircraft, gunfire far away, voices somewhere beyond the hedge. The war comes back. But even then, the first sensation is the ground. France under his hands. Normandy not as a map, but as wet grass and soil. Near Sainte-Mère-Église, the airborne story became one of the famous stories of the night. The town, with its church and square, would be remembered because paratroopers landed in and around it, and because the town became one of the first liberated communities in France during the invasion. But again, before it became memory, it was a real town in the night. Stone walls, dark roofs, a church tower, a church, a square, houses with shutters, people waking to strange sounds, the smell of smoke, damp stone, and fear, the crackle of confusion moving through narrow streets. In a calm retelling, the town is not a scene of spectacle. It is a place where history arrived abruptly and where civilians, soldiers and paratroopers were all pulled into the same dark hour. A woman behind a shutter may have heard the aircraft and then the sounds outside. A child may have been told to stay away from the window. An old man may have whispered that something was happening. The night was no longer ordinary, but it was still night. The stones were still stones. The church tower still rose against the sky. The fields beyond the town still held dew. The road still led toward the beaches. Further west, near Utah Beach, the airborne troops of the American divisions had difficult and essential tasks. They needed to secure routes inland from the beach, especially through areas where flooding and German defences could make movement difficult. Causeways across low, wet ground mattered. Roads mattered. Bridges mattered. Small crossroads mattered. A campaign can turn on places that look ordinary later. A lane between hedges, a stone bridge, a road junction, a field entrance, a causeway over flooded ground. On a tourist map decades later, these may look peaceful. On that night, they were objectives, obstacles, lifelines. The airborne troops landed in confusion, but confusion did not mean failure. Small groups formed. Men found officers or non-commissioned officers. Men moved toward sounds, toward objectives, toward roads, toward whatever part of the plan could still be recovered. One of the untold strengths of the airborne landings was improvisation. When the plan scattered, men still acted. Not always in the way drawn on paper, not always where expected, but enough scattered groups created enough disturbance, enough resistance, enough confusion, and enough pressure to matter. History often remembers perfect plans. Reality often depends on imperfect actions done with persistence. As the airborne troops gathered themselves inland, the fleet continued toward the beaches. On the water, time passed strangely. Some men felt the crossing would never end. Others felt it happened too quickly. The sky ahead began to lighten in faint degrees. Not bright, not warm. Only a thinning of darkness over the eastern edge of sea and cloud. The black water became grey. The forms of nearby craft grew clearer. Faces emerged from shadow. A helmet, a chin strap, a wet cheek, a hand gripping the side of the boat. Someone breathing with eyes closed. Someone murmuring words only he could hear. The first light can be more frightening than darkness, because it reveals what darkness had hidden. The coast would soon become visible. The men who had waited through the night would soon see Normandy not as a word, but as a low line ahead. Before that moment, there was still the sea. Landing craft moved from larger ships toward the shore. In some cases, men had climbed down nets into small craft, a difficult act made harder by heavy gear, wet rope, motion, and rough water. A man descending a cargo net into a landing craft below had to trust his hands, his boots, and the men around him. The larger ship rose and fell. The smaller craft rose and fell differently. The gap shifted. Water slapped below. Voices called instructions. A boot found rope. A hand gripped tight. The body, again, lived the operation one movement at a time. Climb down, step, hold, drop into the craft, make space, sit, wait. The Great Invasion was made of such movements, thousands and thousands of them. The larger ships had their own roles: naval gunfire support, transport, command, control, protection. The crews aboard warships watched the approach, checked guns, read orders, and prepared to support the landings. A sailor aboard a destroyer or battleship might look toward the coast and see the faint line of France. But his own world was still the deck, the guns, the bridge, the engine room, the signal station. The naval side of D-Day was enormous and often less visible in popular memory than the beaches themselves. But without the ships, there is no landing. Without the sailors, there is no crossing. Without the minesweepers, transports, landing craft crews, signalmen, engineers, and naval support, the soldiers do not arrive where history remembers them. So the story gives the sea its place, the channel as road, the fleet as bridge, the sailors as the keepers of that bridge. The weather remained difficult. Many landing craft were pushed off course or arrived under harsh conditions. The sea made coordination harder. The schedule, so carefully planned, met waves, wind, smoke, current, confusion, and human limits. On paper, a landing wave is a neat line. In real water, it becomes a shifting group of craft, each moving through spray and noise, each carrying men whose experience is immediate and physical. The ramp remains up. The coast grows closer, the sound grows thicker, the boat rises and falls, the heart moves faster though the body tries to remain still. A soldier might remember training. Keep moving, do not stop at the ramp, follow the man ahead, get off the beach. But remembering instructions is one thing, standing in the craft as the shore appears is another. In the eastern part of the invasion area, British and Canadian forces approached Gold, Juno and Sword. To the west, American forces approached Utah and Omaha. Each beach had its own conditions. Utah would be helped in part by airborne operations behind it, and by circumstances that placed some troops south of their intended landing area, which unexpectedly proved advantageous. Omaha would become the most difficult and costly of the American beaches that morning. Gold, Juno and Sword would each have their own fierce challenges, their own objectives inland, their own stories of engineers, infantry, armour, commandos, medics and civilians nearby. But before the ramps dropped, before individual beach stories began, there was the shared experience of approach, a coast ahead, water below, sky above, the long night behind, the unknown directly in front. Aircraft moved over the invasion area, some bombed coastal defences, some dropped paratroopers, some flew cover, some navigated through cloud and darkness with imperfect results. The pre-landing bombardment, both naval and aerial, was intended to weaken defences, but in many places it did not fully accomplish what the men approaching the beaches would have wished. This is important historically. Plans can be vast and still incomplete. Bombs can miss, smoke can obscure, defences can survive. The beach a soldier reaches may not be the beach he was told to imagine. Reality modifies every plan, and the first men ashore must meet the reality, not the plan. In a landing craft approaching Omaha, a soldier might feel the difference before he understood it. The sound ahead not softened enough, the beach not empty, obstacles visible, smoke drifting, water rough, voices hard to hear, the craft pushing onward. But the full story of the beaches belongs to the next part. Here, in Block 2, we hold the approach a little longer, because approach is where anticipation lives. The story needs this space. For history, the crossing is logistical. For human beings, it is psychological. The distance between ship and shore becomes a corridor of thought. A man remembers a street at home, a field, a wife, a brother, a mother's kitchen, a school, a factory, a train platform, a baseball field, a pub, a church, a quiet road after rain. Then he returns to the boat. The man beside him is pale. The sergeant is saying something. The coast is closer. The ramp is still up. A medic checks the straps of his bag again. He knows he will be needed. He does not know where first. He may have bandages, morphine, scissors, tourniquets, dressings, and the trained habits of care. He's not there to take ground in the same way as others. He's there to keep men alive where possible. In a sleep story, medics matter because they carry the human counterweight to war. Where machines break, they bind. Where fear rises, they speak calmly. Where the world becomes too loud, they kneel and focus on one person at a time. D-Day had many such people. Medics on beaches, aid men with airborne units, nurses and doctors waiting behind the lines and across the channel, litter bearers, ambulance drivers, hospital ships. The long chain of care was part of Operation Overlord too, not as famous as the landing craft, not as visible as the beaches, but essential. On ships farther offshore, medical preparations were also underway. Spaces prepared to receive casualties, equipment set out, personnel waiting. There is a quiet tension in medical waiting, a desire to be unnecessary, a knowledge that one will be needed. Hands arrange bandages carefully because order matters. A cup of tea cools because no one finishes it. A lamp glows over a table. The sea moves outside. War has not yet arrived in that room, but the room is ready for it. Back over Normandy, paratroopers were already scattered across fields, villages and roads. Some had found one another, some had not. Some moved toward planned objectives. Some created new ones by necessity. The darkness made everything close and uncertain. A hedgerow in Normandy is not just a hedge. The bocage, which would become so important in the long Battle of Normandy, was a landscape of small fields bordered by dense hedges, embankments, trees, and sunken lanes. At night, it could feel like a maze. Even by day, it could slow movement, hide positions, limit visibility, and turn every field into a separate world. The bocage would become one of the great challenges after the landings. But on the night of D-Day, some paratroopers first met it as shadow, earth, roots, and branches. A man trying to move through a hedge might hear others nearby but not see them. A field that looked open from above became enclosed on the ground. A road on a map became a dark lane between banks. A bridge became a whispered objective somewhere beyond trees. This is the untold Normandy beyond the beach. The landscape itself, the land that would shape the battle after the first day. The battle was not only men against men, it was men against terrain, weather, distance, confusion, and exhaustion. A quiet Norman lane could become an obstacle. A farm wall could become cover. A church tower could become a landmark. A flooded meadow could redirect movement. A hedge could hide danger. A village could become a crossroads of memory. The land mattered. And tonight, as the fleet approached, the land waited under darkness. At Pegasus Bridge, east of the landing beaches, British airborne forces would carry out one of the most famous glider operations of D-Day, landing near key bridges over the Caen Canal and the River Orne. Their task was to seize and hold these bridges, helping protect the eastern flank of the landings. The gliders came in low and quiet compared with the engine-powered aircraft, though the landing itself was hard and sudden. For our calm telling, we hold the image just before the landing, a glider descending through darkness, fields and water below, a bridge ahead, men inside, silent, packed close, braced for impact. Wood, canvas, metal, breath. The night outside rushing past, the land rising. A final moment of suspended time, then the earth. The real operation was dangerous and intense, but the moment before contact belongs to our atmosphere of waiting. That small pause between air and ground, between plan and action, between darkness and arrival. Elsewhere, the airborne drops continued. Some confusion helped the Allies more than expected, because scattered paratroopers created the impression of a wider presence. German defenders could not always know where the main concentration was. Small groups caused disruption in many places. Again, history shows that imperfection can have unexpected effects. The plan scatters. The scattered plan creates confusion. Confusion becomes advantage in some areas. Not clean, not simple, but real. War often turns on such unevenness. As the morning approached, the coast began to appear to those on the water. A low dark line, then shapes, then the suggestion of beaches, bluffs, houses, church towers farther inland, and smoke. The men in the landing craft could not see the whole coast as a map. They saw fragments, a cliff, a house, a stretch of sand, a line of obstacles, a burst of water, a darker shape ahead. The sea between the craft and shore became shorter, and because it became shorter, it became larger in the mind. Every yard mattered now. The boat crew guided the craft through waves and obstacles. The soldiers prepared. The ramp remained up. The sound grew. The world narrowed toward the front. For the men in the first waves, the approach would be the last minutes of one life and the beginning of another. Even those who survived would remember the before and after. Before the ramp, after the ramp, before the beach, after the beach. Time divides itself around such moments. But we stop just before that line. Not because the beaches do not matter, they matter deeply, but because the next block must tell them with the space they deserve. Here, we let the crossing complete itself slowly. The aircraft have crossed, the paratroopers have landed or are landing, the gliders have approached their targets, the fleet has crossed the channel, the landing craft are near shore, the grey dawn has arrived, the coast is visible, the invasion has moved from secrecy into contact with the land. Behind the beaches, Normandy is waking. In one farmhouse, a family hears distant sounds and stays inside. In another, someone moves livestock deeper into a barn. In a village, a priest listens from a darkened room. In a kitchen, a woman places a hand over a child's mouth gently, not to frighten, only to keep quiet. In a field, a parachute lies caught in an apple tree. In a lane, two paratroopers whisper over a map. Near a bridge, men move quickly through shadow. On the beach approaches, landing craft push onward. Offshore, larger ships prepare to support. Above, aircraft cross and recross the grey sky. The world has changed, but the day is only beginning. If you are still listening, let the images move slowly. A fleet in grey water, a landing craft rising and falling, a paratrooper descending through darkness, a glider in the final quiet before ground, a Norman village behind closed shutters, a medic's bag under one hand, a sailor wiping spray from his eyes, a map under a low lamp, a field divided by hedgerows, a church tower in the half-light, the coast ahead, the coast now real, the coast no longer a word. D-Day has begun, but the Battle of Normandy is only opening. The story will soon move to Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau and Sword. It will move from the sea to the sand, from the sand to the roads to villages, hedgerows, crossroads, and the long inland struggle that followed. But for now, remain with the crossing. The last minutes before the beaches, the cold sea, the grey light, the men waiting in metal craft, the engine steady, the water striking the hull, the ramp still closed, the breath held, the coast ahead, the operation, vast beyond imagining, arriving one boat, one aircraft, one field, one bridge, one human life at a time. The channel has been crossed, Normandy is in front of them, and morning at last has come. The beaches of Normandy did not appear all at once. They emerged gradually from the grey morning, first as a low uncertain line beyond the water, then as darker shapes, then as sand, shingle, dunes, bluffs, houses, obstacles, smoke, and the hard edge of land after a long night at sea. For the men in the landing craft, this was the moment when the map became real. The names from briefings were no longer only words. Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, Sword. They were no longer lines on paper under a lamp. They were places ahead, each with its own tide, its own sand, its own defences, its own weather, its own confusion and its own memory. The English Channel was behind them now. Not completely, because the sea was still under the hull, still lifting the craft, still slapping against metal, still making men cold and wet and unsteady. But the crossing had become the approach, and the approach had become the landing. The story now must move carefully, because D-Day was not gentle. It was not quiet for those who lived it. It was difficult, dangerous, and filled with fear, courage, confusion, loss, and extraordinary effort. But this is still a sleep story, so we will not tell it with harshness. We will not linger on graphic images. We will not turn suffering into spectacle. We will tell the truth with distance. We will stay close to the human details, the historical shape, the atmosphere of the morning, and the steady movement from the sea to the shore, from shore to inland roads, from the first step on French sand to the long battle that would follow. The first waves came through rough water. Landing craft pushed toward the beaches as naval guns fired from offshore, aircraft passed overhead, and the coast answered with the defences that had been prepared there. To a man inside a landing craft, the world narrowed into sound, motion and waiting. The ramp, the water, the engine, the men beside him, the voice of an officer or sergeant, the weight of equipment, the cold on his hands, the smell of diesel and salt, the knowledge that the ramp would drop soon. A man might try to remember instructions. Move forward, do not stop, find cover, get off the beach, follow the line, help the man next to you. But memory in such moments is not like reading a page. It comes in flashes. A phrase, a command, a face from training, a beach model seen days before, a hand pointing at a map. Then the present returns. The boat rises. The boat falls. Spray comes over the side. Someone shifts. Someone breathes hard. The ramp is still closed. Then the craft grounds or slows. The order comes. The ramp drops. And the morning opens. At Utah Beach, the American landings came ashore farther south than planned, partly because of currents and conditions during the approach. In many military operations, being off target can become disaster. At Utah, the accidental shift placed the landing in a less heavily defended area than expected, and commanders on the beach made a practical decision to adapt to reality rather than cling to the original line on a map. This is one of the important human truths of Normandy. Plans matter, but so does judgment in the moment. A man standing on wet sand with maps, obstacles, men landing around him, and the sound of the morning everywhere, must sometimes look at what is actually in front of him and decide. The beach is here, the exits are here, the mission must continue from here. Utah became, compared with Omaha, a more successful and less costly landing, though it was still dangerous and difficult. The airborne troops inland, scattered though they were, helped disrupt German responses and secure routes. The flooded lowlands behind the beach made certain causeways essential. The men landing from the sea needed a way off the sand and through the landscape beyond. Utah's story is not only the moment of landing, it is the connection between beach and inland, between soldiers coming ashore and paratroopers already moving through fields, lanes and small roads in the dark, between the rough water at dawn and the causeways leading through wet Norman ground. Imagine Utah Beach in the grey morning told softly. Low waves, landing craft near the shore, men moving through surf, wet sand under boots, obstacles standing in the tide, smoke drifting in the air, offshore ships dim through haze, inland beyond the beach fields and roads waiting. A paratrooper who landed hours earlier hears the sounds from the sea and understands that the great landing has begun. A soldier coming ashore does not yet know the paratrooper's night. The paratrooper does not know each boat's crossing, but their stories are now connected by the land between them. At Omaha Beach, the morning was far more difficult. The terrain itself was severe. The beach lay beneath bluffs and defended positions, with obstacles, mines, and German fire-making movement extremely hard. Many units came ashore in disordered conditions. Some landing craft arrived in the wrong places. Some equipment was lost. The preliminary bombardment had not neutralized the defenses as hoped. The men landing there faced one of the most intense and costly parts of D-Day. We say this plainly and respectfully. We do not need to dwell on the worst details. It is enough to understand that Omaha was hard beyond expectation, that men were pinned down, that officers and non-commissioned officers had to improvise, that small groups found ways forward, that engineers, medics, infantrymen, naval crews, and many others worked under terrible conditions, that the beach was not taken by a single clean movement, but by many local efforts, many decisions, many acts of endurance, and many men doing what they could in small groups when the larger plan had been broken by reality. Omaha's story, in a calm voice, is a story of the long minutes after the ramp. A man in the surf, a heavy pack, the water pulling at his legs, the beach ahead seeming impossibly wide, a noise so great that it becomes almost beyond hearing. Smoke, sand, shingle, obstacles, men trying to move, men trying to help others, a medic kneeling, an engineer carrying equipment, a sergeant pointing toward a place to move, a young soldier realizing that no one can cross the whole beach in his mind. He can only reach the next piece of cover, then the next, then the next. That is how Omaha was crossed, not as a clean line on a map, as a series of short distances, from water to sand, from sand to shingle, from shingle to a low place, from a low place to a gap, from a gap to the base of the bluff, from one group to another, movement made from fragments, courage made from inches, time stretched, and above all of it, the grey sky. At Omaha, the beach exits were difficult to secure, and the fighting to move inland was slow and costly. But by the end of the day, footholds had been gained. The impossible had not become easy. It had only become possible because many people kept moving when movement itself was hard. In the soft telling of this story, we remember the beach not only as a place of combat, but as a place of human endurance. Wet boots, salt water, sand in clothing, a hand reaching down, a radio set heavy and vulnerable. A man carrying messages because wires and radios could fail, engineers clearing obstacles. Naval gunfire from destroyers moving dangerously close to shore to support the men on the beach. Small boats moving in and out through rough water. Medical personnel trying to create order in a place where order was difficult. The morning on Omaha did not feel like a single event to those inside it. It felt like survival from one moment to the next. Gold Beach, where British forces landed, carried its own story. The beach lay between La Rivière and Le Hamel, with strong points and villages that had to be overcome, obstacles on the shore and the need to move inland toward Bayeux and link with other forces. The British landings at Gold made progress, though not without difficulty and loss. Specialised armoured vehicles, engineering equipment, naval support and infantry all formed part of the effort. The British had prepared for the particular problems of landing on defended beaches, and some of the specialised vehicles known as Hobart's Funnies played important roles across British and Canadian sectors. These machines were strange-looking and practical. Tanks adapted for clearing mines, laying bridges, fascines, flails. armoured vehicles designed not for elegance, but for solving beach problems under fire. This is another untold layer of D-Day. Engineering, improvisation, the recognition that courage alone could not cross every obstacle. Someone had to think about mud, mines, walls, ditches, beach exits, cratered roads, heavy equipment, how to move men and vehicles inland when the coast had been shaped to stop them. A sleep story can pause here, not on the violence, but on the human intelligence of preparation. A workshop months before, a drawing, a test, a strange vehicle moving over training ground, a mechanic adjusting something under cold rain, a soldier looking at the machine and wondering whether it would work. Then, on D-Day, the same machine becomes a small answer to a very large problem. At Gold Beach, the morning moved from landing to village, from beach to inland roads. Men passed through coastal defences into Norman settlements. The names of small places became part of the day: La Rivière, Le Hamel, Armanche nearby, which would later become important for the artificial harbour, Bayeux inland, which would soon be liberated. But in the moment, each place was immediate: a wall, a house, a lane, a field, a sign, a church tower, a wounded man carried to shelter, a tank moving slowly, a soldier glancing at a window, a civilian behind a door, waiting for the sound to pass. Juno Beach belonged to the Canadians. The Canadian forces came ashore between the British beaches, facing rough seas, obstacles, mines, and strong defences. The approach was difficult, and in places the first waves suffered heavily, especially where the tide and obstacles created dangerous conditions. Yet the Canadians pushed inland, and by the end of the day they had advanced farther inland than many other Allied units, though not all original objectives were reached. Juno's story carries a particular Canadian memory. Men from towns and provinces across Canada arriving in the grey light of a French morning. A long way from home, from farms, cities, ports, prairies, factories and families across the Atlantic. A man from Ontario, another from Nova Scotia, another from Manitoba, another from Quebec, another from British Columbia. Different voices, different homes, the same cold sea, the same beach ahead. Inside a landing craft approaching Juno, the channel's roughness mattered deeply. Some craft were delayed. Some men had to land under difficult timing as the tide rose around obstacles. The beach was not a flat, empty stage. It was a complicated, dangerous edge between sea and land. Yet amid all of that, the details remain human. A Canadian soldier stepping from craft into water, a heavy pack pulling at his shoulders, a line of men moving through surf, a tank appearing through spray, a beach house in the distance, the smell of smoke and salt. A shouted instruction partly lost in wind, a medic moving low, a man pausing only long enough to help another forward. The Juno story moves quickly from beach to towns such as Courseulles-sur-Mer, Bernières-sur-Mer, and Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer. These were not only objectives, they were communities, houses of stone and plaster, streets, seawalls, gardens, families, rooms where breakfast might once have been ordinary. War turned them into part of the landing area. In a calm narration, we let that contradiction remain. A seaside town under a grey sky, a place that should have held fishermen, children, markets, church bells and summer visitors. Now filled with soldiers, smoke, broken walls, and the shock of liberation arriving through danger. By the end of the day, Canadian troops had moved inland with determination. But Juno, like every beach, left memories too heavy to be reduced to a statistic. Sword Beach lay at the eastern end of the landing area. British forces landed there, with the goal of moving inland toward Caen, a city that would become one of the central names in the long Battle of Normandy. Commandos, including men of the British and French commandos, had important roles in this sector, including movement toward Ouistreham and the link with airborne troops near Pegasus Bridge. Sword's Beach story leads naturally inland toward Caen, toward bridges, roads, and the eastern flank of the invasion. Here too the landing was not simply one moment, it was a chain. Landing craft reaching the shore, men moving across sand, vehicles following, obstacles cleared, strong points dealt with, roads entered, villages approached, bridges connected to the wider plan. The eastern flank mattered because the entire lodgement had to be protected and expanded. The goal was not merely to stand on beaches. The goal was to build a foothold strong enough to survive counterattack, receive supplies, bring in more men, bring in vehicles, move inland, and begin the liberation of Western Europe. This is why D-Day cannot be understood only as the act of landing. The landing was the opening of a door, but once the door opened, an army had to move through it. Sword Beach reminds us of that. The road to Caen would prove far harder and slower than expected. Caen was an objective for the first day, but it would not fall immediately. It would become part of a long, grinding struggle in the weeks that followed. So even in the early morning of June 6th, the future battle was already hidden behind the first success. The beach was only the first threshold. Behind it stood the long Norman campaign. On all 5 beaches, the first day was also a day of improvisation. Plans met tide, smoke, defended positions, rough seas, scattered landings, lost equipment, broken communications, and unexpected openings. Officers were lost. Non-commissioned officers stepped forward. Small groups found paths, engineers cleared, medics treated, sailors brought in more waves. Signalmen tried to connect chaos to command. Tank crews struggled with sand, water, obstacles, and narrow exits. Infantrymen moved inland step by step. No one person could see the whole invasion. Even commanders had only reports, delays, fragments, and maps that were always slightly behind reality. A soldier on the beach saw only his part. A sailor offshore saw the coast through smoke. A pilot above saw patterns no one below could see, but not the faces. A villager behind a shutter heard sounds and saw glimpses. A medic saw one wounded man at a time. An engineer saw one obstacle, one wire, one gap, one path. A radio operator heard broken transmissions. A commander read messages and tried to assemble meaning. D-Day was made of fragments. Only later did it become a complete story. The beaches had different outcomes, but together they formed the beginning of the Allied lodgement in Normandy. By the end of June 6th, the Allies had not achieved everything planned. Caen had not been taken. Some beachheads were shallower than hoped. The link-ups were incomplete in places. The cost had been high, especially at Omaha. But the crucial fact was that the landings held. The Allies had come ashore and remained ashore. That is the centre of D-Day. Not perfection, not ease, not a flawless plan. A foothold, a hard-won lodgement on the coast of France. From that foothold, everything else would have to be built. More troops, more vehicles, more supplies, roads, depots, medical routes, communications, bridges, airfields, harbours, fuel. A beachhead is not secure simply because men land. It must be fed, reinforced, connected, expanded, defended. The long battle begins where the famous morning ends, but before we leave the beaches, let the story slow down and look at the smaller human scenes that history often passes too quickly. A medic on the sand, hands busy, voice calm because calm itself is medicine. He cannot treat the whole beach, only the man in front of him. He opens a pouch. He uses what he has. He speaks close to be heard. The sea moves behind him. Another wave of landing craft comes in. He continues. An engineer near an obstacle, working under pressure, focused on the task. The obstacle is not symbolic to him. It is wood, metal, wire, explosive, angle, tool, timing. He is trained for this. Training returns through his hands. A sailor in a landing craft making another run through rough water. He has already brought men in. He may go back for more. He's cold, wet, and exhausted, but the craft must move. The ramp must be raised. The engine must be handled. The next wave must come. A soldier at the base of a bluff looking back once toward the water. Not for long, just once. The sea is filled with ships. The beach behind him is unreal. The only direction now is inland. Another soldier finds himself beside men he did not start with. Units have mixed. Plans have shifted. But the small group becomes temporary order. You go there. I follow. Move when he moves. Wait here. Now. Again. This is how units reform in confusion, not always by formal structure, sometimes by proximity, confidence, and the need to keep going. On Juno, a Canadian soldier passes a damaged seaside house and sees a curtain moving in a broken window. For a moment he thinks of the home inside the war, a room, a table, a chair, a life interrupted. Then he moves on. At Gold, a British soldier steps through a village street where glass lies on the ground like ice. He hears someone call from inside a house, but he cannot stop. The road ahead matters. At Sword, a commando moves inland under a low sky, carrying both exhaustion and purpose, aware that the bridge and the men beyond it are part of the same day. At Utah, men push toward causeways, toward exits, toward the inland connection with airborne forces who have been fighting, hiding, gathering, and improvising since the night. Behind the lines, beachmasters begin imposing order where they can. This is another important but less glamorous part of D-Day. Beaches filled with men, vehicles, wreckage, equipment, incoming waves, outgoing wounded, commands, confusion, and the need to create traffic flow under pressure. Someone has to decide where vehicles go, where supplies land, where wounded are moved, where obstacles remain, which routes are open, which lanes are safe. The beach must become not only a battlefield, but a working port without a harbour. Order has to be built on sand. This is not poetic in the usual way. It is practical, and practicality on D-Day saved time and lives. The invasion depended on men who could make systems function in impossible places. A sign placed, a route marked, a vehicle redirected, a jam cleared, a radio message sent, a beach exit opened, a mine marked, a bulldozer pushing, a truck waiting, a stretcher carried. The beach becomes a machine of movement, imperfect, chaotic, essential. Offshore, the ships continue their work. Naval gunfire supports the landings. Destroyers come close in places where support is desperately needed. Large ships fire from farther out. Landing craft continue to shuttle. The sea remains rough. The channel continues to move under everything. Even after men reach the beach, the sea remains part of the battle. It controls what can arrive, when, and in what condition. A vehicle waterproofed for landing may fail. A craft may beach poorly. A supply may be lost. A schedule may slip. The sea, again, refuses to become a passive road. It is an actor in the day. Above, aircraft move through cloud and smoke. Some missions succeed, some miss. Some pilots cannot see clearly. Some provide support where they can. The air is layered with sound. But beneath all of it, in the middle of the beach, a man's world can still narrow to one thing. A hand signal, a hedge ahead, a gap in wire, a friend's shoulder, a wall, a ditch, a church tower, the next step. For the Norman civilians near the beaches, the day was terrifying and bewildering. Liberation arrived not as a parade, but as an enormous military event crashing into their villages, roads, fields, and homes. Some hid in cellars, some watched through cracks in shutters, some fled when they could, some were trapped by the fighting around them, some helped when it was possible, some simply waited, because waiting was the only safe action. Imagine a family in a stone cellar, the ceiling low, the air cool, a candle burning carefully, dust falling once from the stones above, a child under a blanket, a woman listening, an old man holding a rosary or simply his own hands. They know the Allies have come, or they suspect it. They know the war may be changing, but hope and fear arrive together. Outside, the world is too loud. Inside, time becomes slow. The civilian story is part of the Battle of Normandy, not a side note, a central human truth. The land being liberated was inhabited. Every road had people near it. Every village had memory. Every field belonged to someone, had been planted, walked, crossed, worked, and known. When armies move through a landscape, they move through lives. By the afternoon of June 6th, the beaches were held, though differently and with varied depth. The first decisive question had been answered. Could the Allies get ashore and stay? Yes. Not easily. Not completely according to plan. Not without heavy cost. But yes. The answer was enough to begin the next question. Could they expand? Could they link the beachheads? Could they bring in supplies fast enough? Could they withstand counterattacks? Could they take Cherbourg? Could they break through the bocage? Could they capture Caen? Could they turn a landing into a campaign? That is where the Battle of Normandy truly begins to widen. The popular imagination often stops at the beaches, but the soldiers did not stop there. They moved inland, into dunes, fields, orchards, villages, roads lined with hedgerows, causeways, bridges, farmyards, sunken lanes, stone walls. The land beyond the beach was not open and simple, it was complex. Especially in the west, the bocage created a battlefield of small compartments. Each hedge could hide danger, each lane could become a trap, each field could feel separate from the next. A tank might struggle to see, infantry might move slowly, artillery, mortars, mines, snipers, machine guns, counterattacks, and the difficulty of coordination all turn the inland battle into a slow and exhausting campaign. But we are not fully there yet. At the end of Block 3, we stand at the edge between D-Day and the long battle. The beaches are no longer only beaches, they have become entry points. Behind the waterline, roads are beginning to fill. Men move inland in mixed groups. Some objectives have been reached, some have not. Some units are where planned, others are not. Airborne troops are linking with seaborne forces in places. Engineers are opening routes. Medics are working, sailors continue bringing more men and supplies. Civilians wait for the first clear sign of what the day means. The grey morning has become a long day, and the long day is becoming evening. Imagine Normandy at the end of June 6th, told softly. The beach is still busy, the tide moving in and out, landing craft coming and going, ships offshore under a low sky, smoke thinning in places, roads behind the beaches crowded with movement, fields trampled, hedgerows dark and dense, village windows broken or shuttered, church towers standing, civilians emerging cautiously in some places, still hidden in others, soldiers resting for moments wherever they can. A man sitting against a wall with his eyes closed, not asleep but emptied by the day. A medic washing his hands, an engineer leaning on a tool, a sailor looking toward shore from a landing craft and understanding that the work is not finished. A paratrooper finally meeting men from the beach and realizing the night and morning have connected. At Omaha, the bluff line has been crossed in places. At Utah, the link inland is strengthening. At Gold, Juneau and Sword, the push inland continues. Pegasus Bridge is held. Sainte-Mère-Église is part of the airborne story. Caen remains beyond immediate reach. Bayeux waits. Saint-Lô waits. Cherbourg waits. The Bocage waits. Falaise waits far ahead in time. The Battle of Normandy has opened, but it has not revealed its full length. For sleep, we can let the first day settle slowly. The sound lowers, not because the real day was quiet, but because our attention moves from the sharp edge of landing to the wider image of a foothold established. A bridgehead, a coast entered, a door opened. The men who survived the first hours did not enter a simple victory. They entered the next task. Dig in, move inland, find the unit, find the road, find the objective. Bring supplies, bring ammunition, bring water, bring medical aid. Bring more men, hold until morning. War often turns even triumph into labour. The first day ends not with conclusion, but with work. As evening comes, the sea remains behind them. The Channel still carries ships. England remains across the water. Normandy is now beneath their boots. The sand of the beaches gives way to roads, orchards, and hedgerows. The invasion has moved from the sea into the land, and the story, from here, will follow it inland. If you are listening now, you can let the beach names drift gently through your mind. Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, Sword. 5 names, 5 places, 5 doors open from the sea. Let them become not noise but memory. Grey water, low sky, wet sand, a ramp, a hand, a medic's bag, a church tower inland, a road beyond the dunes, a field behind a hedge, the long battle waiting beyond the first day. The story will continue, but it will slow again. It will leave the beaches gradually and move into the Normandy countryside, into villages, farms, hedgerows, roads, aid stations, supply routes, and the long human labour that followed D-Day. Because the untold story of Normandy is not only the moment of landing, it is the weeks after, the tired advance, the crowded roads, the civilians in cellars, the engineers repairing bridges, the medics working under lamps, the radio operators listening through static, the cooks heating coffee near field kitchens, the soldiers sleeping beside stone walls, the rain on helmets, the dust on boots, the smell of orchards after shell smoke has drifted away, the sound of church bells returning one day after long silence. D-Day opened the door. The Battle of Normandy was the long passage through it. Tonight, we have reached the shore. The Channel lies behind, the beachheads hold, the first day begins to fade into evening. And inland, beyond the dunes and the roads, the hedgerows wait in the soft dark green of the Norman countryside. Beyond the beaches, Normandy did not open easily. It did not become a wide road leading calmly into France. It became fields, lanes, orchards, stone farms, narrow crossroads, low hills, small rivers, broken bridges, crowded tracks, and hedgerows so thick that a man could stand a few yards away and be hidden completely. The first day had opened the door from the sea, but the country behind that door was not empty. It was not simple. It was not the smooth, open landscape that some planners had hoped for when they imagined the movement inland. It was the bocage, a green, enclosed, ancient countryside of raised earth banks, tangled roots, thick hedges, sunken lanes, apple trees, farm walls, small fields, and hidden corners. From the air it could look peaceful, almost gentle, a patchwork of fields, a rural landscape shaped by centuries of farming. But for the soldiers moving inland after D-Day, the bocage became something very different. It became a maze. A field was not only a field. It was a small room made of earth and leaves. A hedge was not only a hedge, it was a wall. A lane was not only a lane. It was a narrow corridor where every bend hid what came next. A farm was not only a farm, it was a cluster of buildings, walls, gates, barns, wells, animals, cellars, civilians, and the possibility of danger from any direction. The Battle of Normandy had moved beyond the beaches, and now the land itself began to slow the armies. Tonight, we move inland with the story, not quickly, not loudly, but carefully, from the sand to the roads, from the landing craft to the fields, from the first day into the long human work that followed. Because the untold story of Normandy is not only D-Day, it is what happened after the famous morning. It is the slow expansion of the beachhead, the struggle to link the landing areas, the effort to bring supplies ashore, the difficult movement through hedgerows, the civilians emerging from cellars, the medics working in barns and aid stations, the engineers repairing roads and bridges, the radio operators trying to make sense of broken signals, the truck drivers moving through dust and rain, the cooks heating coffee near field kitchens, the soldiers sleeping for minutes beside stone walls, the long campaign hidden behind the single word Normandy. On the evening of June 6th and in the days after, the Allied forces had to turn a landing into a lodgment. That sounds simple when written in military language. A lodgment, a foothold, a beachhead. But in reality it meant everything had to move. Men, vehicles, ammunition, food, water, fuel, medical supplies, radios, wire, bulldozers, artillery, engineers, bridging equipment, spare parts, maps, command posts, field hospitals, road signs, traffic control. The beaches had to become working gateways. The sea had to continue feeding the land, and the land, once reached, had to be organised fast enough to survive. A soldier who had fought his way off the beach might think first of the road ahead, but behind him, another battle of logistics had already begun. Landing craft still arrived through rough water. Men unloaded crates, boxes, vehicles, fuel cans, medical equipment, tools and ammunition. Beachmasters directed movement through confusion. Engineers cleared lanes. Bulldozers pushed aside obstacles, roads were marked. Wounded men were carried back toward medical care. New units came forward. The tide rose and fell. The sea remained unpredictable. The beach, which had been a place of assault, now had to become a place of movement. A working port without a proper harbour. This is one of the quiet miracles of Operation Overlord. Not only that men landed, but that, after landing, the Allies managed to keep landing. A battlefield is not sustained by courage alone. It is sustained by supply. Every meal, every bandage, every gallon of fuel, every replacement part, every radio battery, every shell, every map, every stretcher, every can of water, every plank laid across mud, every road sign placed at a confusing junction. All of these ordinary things make the extraordinary possible. In the days after D-Day, Normandy became crowded with effort. Imagine a road behind the beaches, a narrow Norman road bordered by hedges so high they seem to lean inward. The surface is rough, damp in places, dusty in others. Military vehicles move slowly. A jeep, a truck, a half-track, a tank, an ambulance. Another truck waiting because something ahead has stopped. A military policeman stands at a crossroads, directing traffic with tired arms. Dust clings to his face. His boots are pale with chalky Norman earth. He points one convoy left, holds another back, waves an ambulance through. He may not be in a famous photograph, but without him, the road becomes confusion, and confusion costs time. A little farther along, engineers work near a damaged bridge. The stream below is narrow, moving through grass and mud. The bridge has been hit, or weakened, or blocked. Men carry planks. A vehicle waits with its engine running. Someone measures. Someone shouts a short instruction. Someone wipes sweat and dust from his face. The work is practical, repetitive, and urgent. The bridge does not care about strategy. It either holds, or it does not. And until it holds, the road beyond is only a line on a map. In a nearby field, medics have set up an aid station in a farm building. The barn smells of hay, damp stone, wool, antiseptic, mud, smoke, and tired bodies. A lamp hangs from a beam. A table has been cleared, bandages are stacked, water is carried in. The barn that once held tools, feed, animals, and the rhythms of rural life has become part of the medical chain of Normandy. Outside, vehicles pass on the road. Inside, voices are low. A medic speaks calmly because calm itself can steady the room. A man writes a name. Another checks a bandage. Another heats water. A blanket is lifted. A stretcher is moved. War can make the world enormous, but medical care makes it small again. One person, one wound, one breath, one blanket, one cup of water. The aid station is not the whole battle. It is the place where the whole battle arrives one human being at a time. In a farmhouse cellar, a Norman family waits. They have been waiting for days, though time has become difficult to measure. The cellar is cool. The stone walls hold dampness. A few jars sit on a shelf. A small lamp or candle gives low light. A child sleeps against a folded coat. An older woman sits with her hands in her lap. A man listens to the sounds above. Engines, footsteps, distant firing, voices in languages he may or may not understand. The family has lived through occupation. Now liberation is arriving, but not gently. This is another truth the script must hold. Liberation was hope, but it came through danger, destruction, fear, and uncertainty for civilians caught in the fighting. A village could be freed and damaged at the same time. A family could feel joy and terror in the same day. A child could hear the word liberators and still be afraid of the noise outside. For civilians, the Battle of Normandy was not an abstract campaign. It was the road outside the house, the field behind the barn, the church tower, the well, the cellar, the cow that had to be moved, the bread that could not be baked, the window that must not be approached, the soldier at the door asking for directions, the wounded man carried past the gate, the orchard struck by shells, the road full of vehicles, the long wait for a safe morning. The story of Normandy must include them, because armies do not move through empty space. They move through people's homes. In the days after the landings, the Allies worked to connect the separate beachheads. The 5 landing areas had to become one continuous front. Utah had to link with Omaha, Omaha with gold, gold with Juneau, Juneau with sword. The airborne forces had to connect with those coming from the sea. Roads had to be opened. Strong points had to be reduced. German counterattacks had to be held back. The entire lodgement had to be deepened and strengthened. This was slow work. The first day had not achieved every objective. Caen, intended to be taken early, remained in German hands. Cherbourg, the vital port at the north of the Cotentin Peninsula, was still far away. The interior of Normandy was not yet open, and the German army, though surprised and pressured, was not broken. It responded, it moved, it defended, it counterattacked, it made the road inland costly and slow, but again, we tell this with calm distance. The Battle of Normandy was not a single dramatic scene. It was day after day of movement, resistance, fatigue, adaptation, and endurance. It was maps changing by small amounts, a village taken, a road cleared, a field crossed, a bridge secured, a counterattack stopped, a convoy delayed, a unit reorganized, a wounded man evacuated, a supply dump built. A command post moved into a farmhouse, a radio line repaired, a soldier falling asleep under an apple tree with his helmet beside him. The bocage became one of the defining features of the inland battle, especially for American forces moving west from Omaha and Utah. The hedgerows were not decorative. They were earth banks, sometimes centuries old, topped with dense vegetation, roots, bushes, and trees. They could be taller than a man. They created enclosed fields where visibility was limited. They provided cover for defenders. They made tanks vulnerable when moving through narrow openings. They made coordination between infantry and armour difficult. They slowed progress to a painful pace. A field could take time, then the next field, then the next, each one separate, each one dangerous, each one demanding attention. Imagine a small American patrol moving along a sunken lane. The hedges rise on both sides. The lane is shadowed even in daytime. Leaves move in a light wind. The air smells of damp earth, crushed grass, smoke, and dust. A bird starts from the hedge and disappears. The men move slowly. No one sees far. A map may show a road, a field, and a line of trees, but the map cannot show the feeling of being enclosed by green walls. The bocage absorbs sound. It hides movement. It turns a broad campaign into a series of small, tense spaces. For sleep storytelling, the sensory details are important, but we keep them gentle where we can. The cool shade of the lane, the wet leaves, the mud on boots, the old roots holding the bank together, the stone farmhouse beyond the field, the apple tree with early summer fruit not yet ripe, the church tower visible for one moment, then hidden again by hedge and slope. Normandy in June was green. That greenness is part of its memory. The strange contrast between a beautiful landscape and a hard campaign. Blue-grey sky, green hedges, white apple blossoms already past, or orchards leafed out, stone houses, fields of grass, cows startled by engines, farm gates splintered, roads crowded with military traffic, dust when it was dry, mud when it rained. The same landscape could be peaceful in one glance and dangerous in the next. This contrast is central to the Battle of Normandy. The land was not dramatic in a desert or mountain way. It was intimate, rural, enclosed, human-scaled, and that made the fighting feel close, slow, and exhausting. The soldiers moving through it had to learn quickly. They adapted equipment and tactics to the hedgerows. Tanks were fitted with improvised cutting devices to break through the banks more effectively. Infantry and armour learned to cooperate in the enclosed terrain. Engineers became essential. So did patience. So did local leadership. Again, the untold story is adaptation. The plan meets reality. Reality resists. People adjust. A soldier learns that a field is not open. A tank crew learns that a hedge is a wall. An engineer learns that a road shown as passable may be blocked. A commander learns that progress will be measured not only in miles, but in fields, lanes, and hedges. A medic learns that evacuation through bocage takes longer. A truck driver learns that every crossroads can become a waiting place. The battle becomes a lesson taught by the land. In British and Canadian sectors, the struggle around Caen became a long and difficult part of the campaign. Caen had been an early objective, important because of its roads, open ground beyond it, and position on the eastern side of the lodgement. But German forces defended strongly, including armoured units. The city and surrounding area became the focus of repeated operations, heavy fighting and great destruction. For the soldiers and civilians there, the name Caen carried weeks of hardship. In a calm narration, Caen is not only a dot on the map, it is a city of streets, houses, churches, ruins, cellars, and people waiting under bombardment and battle. Before the war, Caen was a real place of shops, schools, markets, bicycles, cafes, church bells, stone facades, and daily routines. During the battle, those routines were shattered. Civilians sheltered where they could. Allied forces tried to push forward. German forces held on. The city became one of the hard centres of the Normandy campaign. The story of Caen reminds us that liberation could come slowly and painfully. A city could be on the path to freedom and still suffer deeply on that path. Imagine a cellar in Caen. Stone walls, a low ceiling, dust in the air, a family gathered with neighbours. Someone has brought a bucket of water. Someone has a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. A child sleeps because children can sleep even when adults cannot. An old man tries to remember which streets are still passable. A woman listens to the sounds above and cannot tell whether they are closer or farther than before. Outside, armies move through the city's edges and surrounding villages. Inside, time is counted in candles, water, footsteps, and the hope that the next hour will pass. The Allied soldiers approaching Caen did not experience it as a symbol either. They experienced fields, villages, ridgelines, roads, and strong resistance. British and Canadian units moved through a landscape where progress could be hard-won and uncertain. Tank crews watched for hidden threats. Infantry moved through villages and fields. Artillery thundered in the distance. Commanders tried to coordinate under pressure. Supply units worked behind them. Medics moved where they could. The battle for Caen was part of the wider Normandy campaign, drawing German armoured strength and shaping the conditions for the eventual breakout elsewhere. But for the men there, it was the next village, the next road, the next order, the next night. This is how we will continue to balance the script. Large meaning, small experience. The Eastern Front around Caen and the Western Bocage struggle were different in terrain and character, but both belonged to the same campaign. The Allies needed to expand the lodgement, capture ports, secure roads, bring in supplies, and break out of the German defensive system. The Germans tried to contain the beachhead, counterattack where possible, and use the terrain to slow Allied movement. The result was not a quick, clean advance. It was a campaign of weeks. This matters for retention too, because the viewer needs to understand that the story is not over after D-Day. D-Day is the opening. The Battle of Normandy is the long passage, and this block is where we show that passage in human form. Supply lines became the quiet arteries of the invasion. Once men were ashore, they needed everything. A rifle without ammunition becomes weight. A tank without fuel becomes steel. A wounded man without evacuation remains in danger. An army without food slows. A radio without batteries falls silent. A road without traffic control becomes a knot. Supplies came over the beaches and through artificial harbours known as mulberries, including the harbour established at Arromanches for the British sector. These temporary harbours were extraordinary feats of engineering, built to solve the problem that the Allies did not initially control a major intact port. The harbour at Arromanches, Mulberry B, helped sustain the Allied build-up, while the American Mulberry at Omaha was badly damaged by a storm later in June. The weather again shaped history. A storm could wreck equipment, delay supplies, and remind everyone that the sea remained powerful even after the landing succeeded. Imagine Arromanches after the first days, the coastline under a grey sky, massive artificial harbour components off the shore, ships unloading, vehicles moving, cranes working, men in helmets and oilskins directing traffic, the sea still lifting and dropping the floating roadways, waves striking concrete caissons, the beach transformed into an improvised gateway for an army. This is not the image many people first think of when they think of Normandy, but it is essential. The battle depended on sustained arrival. Every day more material had to come ashore. The famous first wave is only the beginning. The 100th truck, the 1000th crate, the repaired road, the working harbour, the fuel dump, the medical station. These are what turn a landing into a campaign. In a field behind the beaches, a field kitchen appears. Not glamorous, not dramatic. A few vehicles, a canvas cover, steam rising, men standing with mess tins, coffee or tea poured quickly, food hot enough to matter. The soldiers come through in small groups, tired, muddy, hungry, sometimes too tired to speak. A cook ladles food. Another man washes tins in a bucket. Someone jokes quietly. Someone does not respond. Someone eats standing. Someone sits on an ammunition box and falls asleep with the spoon still in hand. Food is not a small thing in a campaign. It is a return to the body. It says, for this minute, you're still here. Eat, drink, move on. A little farther down the road, a radio truck operates under camouflage netting. Inside, the air is warm and close. Equipment hums. A man wearing headphones listens through static. Messages come fragmented. Coordinates, requests, reports, corrections, delays. The battle beyond him is fields, roads, smoke, and movement. Inside the truck it is sound, paper, pencil, and concentration. He writes, repeats, waits, listens again. The radio operator may never see the place named in the message, but the message moves because of him. The modern viewer might imagine warfare as constant direct action, but much of it is communication. A message sent, a message delayed, a message misunderstood, a wire cut, a radio failing, a courier sent on a motorcycle through a dangerous road, a signalman repairing a line under rain. Communication is another quiet layer of Normandy, and when communication breaks, men improvise. A runner, a flare, a hand signal, a shouted instruction, a map marked with a grease pencil, a jeep sent back through dust. War is full of imperfect connections. The Battle of Normandy was also a battle of roads. Small roads, sunken lanes, village streets. Causeways, crossroads, roads damaged by craters, blocked by vehicles, narrowed by hedges, crowded with units moving forward and wounded moving back. A road in Normandy could become a lifeline and a problem at the same time. Too many vehicles, too little space, a broken tank, a destroyed bridge, a herd of frightened cattle, a column waiting because the lead vehicle cannot move. Military police, engineers, drivers, and officers all work to keep movement possible. In a sleep story image, see a convoy at dusk. Trucks lined along a lane, hedgerows on both sides, headlights controlled or dimmed, engines idling low, men sitting silently in the backs of vehicles, a driver with one hand on the wheel staring ahead, rain beginning softly on canvas, a motorcycle messenger passing slowly, then disappearing around a bend. The road smells of mud, gasoline, wet leaves, and tired men. The convoy waits, then moves a few yards, stops again. This too is Normandy. Not only the beaches, not only the famous objectives, the waiting roads, the engines, the dust, the rain, the slow movement of an army trying to grow from the coast into the land. The German defenders used the terrain skillfully. The hedgerows, villages and ridgelines helped them delay Allied advances. They had experienced soldiers, strong defensive positions and in some sectors, armoured units that made progress difficult. The Allied advantages in air power, naval support, manpower and logistics mattered enormously, but they did not make the ground easy. This is a key part of the campaign's truth. Even with overwhelming material strength building behind them, the Allies had to fight through a landscape that favoured defence. The result was exhaustion, days of small advances, units reduced and reorganised, men learning the terrain through hard experience. Night after night the soldiers rested where they could, in ditches, behind walls, in barns, under vehicles, beside hedges, in captured houses, under rain capes, on the edge of roads. A man might sleep for an hour beside an orchard, with artillery far away and the smell of crushed apples or damp grass nearby. Another might wake to find dew on his blanket. Another might not remove his boots for days. Another might write a letter by the light of a covered lamp, saying very little of what he had seen, and much more about weather, food, and whether he was all right. Letters from the front often softened reality, not because men were dishonest, but because they knew someone at home would read them. A letter might say, "I am fine. The food is all right. It rains a good deal. I have seen some beautiful country. Do not worry. Such lines hold more than they say." In a barn near a Norman village, a soldier writes with a pencil stub. The paper rests on a crate. Rain taps on the roof. A cow, if still there, moves softly in the dark. Other men sleep nearby. He does not know when the letter will be sent. He writes anyway. Writing is a way of remaining connected to a world beyond the hedgerow, a world where rooms are lit warmly, where someone waits for news, where names are spoken at kitchen tables. The civilian letters of Normandy told another story. Families trying to send word that they had survived, that the village was damaged, that someone was missing, that the roads were blocked, that the church was gone or still standing, that the Americans had come, that the British had come, that the Canadians had come, that the fighting was close, that the fighting had moved on, that there was hope, that there was fear, that there was no bread, that the cows were gone, that the roof leaked, that everyone was sleeping in the cellar. War reduces and expands life at the same time. The world becomes enormous in consequence and tiny in practical need. Water, food, shelter, news, a safe road, a candle, a bandage, a blanket, a place to sleep. The Battle of Normandy had many fronts of need. As the days turned into weeks, the weather changed. Sun, rain, cloud, dust, mud. The Normandy summer was not one mood. There were bright days when the fields seemed too green for war. There were wet days when roads became slippery and miserable. There were evenings when low light touched church towers and orchards with a beauty that felt almost cruel beside the destruction. There were mornings of mist, when hedgerows faded into white and soldiers moved quietly because visibility was poor. Weather affected aircraft, movement, morale, and memory. A veteran might remember not only the date of an action, but the smell of rain on the hedges, the dust in the throat, the the sound of vehicles at night, the colour of a field at dawn. The human mind keeps atmosphere. That is why our script keeps atmosphere. Because viewers may come for history, but they stay when history becomes felt. A strong script must keep moving, but it must also give the listener places to rest. So this fourth block moves through layers. Beachhead, Bocage, civilians, medics, engineers, supply, roads, Khan, Aramanchis, field kitchens, radio trucks, letters, rain. Each layer tells the viewer that the Battle of Normandy is larger than the landing, and each layer gives the mind a new image before it becomes too repetitive. This is how we keep attention gently, not with shocks, with meaningful progression. The Allied build-up continued, more divisions arrived, more vehicles came ashore, more supplies moved inland. Temporary airstrips were built in Normandy, allowing Allied aircraft to operate closer to the front. Engineers laid metal tracks and repaired roads. Military government and civil affairs began dealing with liberated areas. Prisoners were gathered, hospitals expanded, burials took place, maps were updated, command posts moved. The invasion became a living system. At the same time, the Germans brought forces to contain it. The front hardened. The campaign became a struggle of attrition in some sectors and slow maneuver in others. The beaches were no longer the whole story. The story had moved into the interior. One of the most powerful images of Normandy after D-Day is a soldier resting in a field beside a hedgerow while the army moves around him. He may have only 10 minutes. His helmet is beside him. His boots are muddy. His rifle is within reach. The hedge above him hums faintly with insects. Somewhere down the lane, an engine starts. Farther away, artillery rumbles. A truck passes. Dust settles on his sleeve. He closes his eyes. For 10 minutes, the war becomes sound at a distance. His body sinks into the grass. The smell is earth, leaves, and sweat. He does not dream. He only disappears briefly into fatigue. Then someone calls. He opens his eyes. He stands. The army moves again. This is the sleep within war. Not peaceful, but necessary. A body borrowing rest from a hard day. In a nearby village, a civilian woman sweeps broken glass from a doorway after the fighting has moved a little farther on. The act is almost impossible and completely ordinary. Sweep the glass, clear the threshold, find water, check the neighbour, look at the church, see if the cow returned, ask who is alive, listen for engines, start again. Liberation does not instantly restore normal life. It begins with small acts among ruins, a broom, a bucket, a repaired door, a shared loaf, a soldier giving chocolate to a child, a warning to stay off the road, a sign painted in hurried letters, a burial, a prayer, a roof patched with whatever can be found. Normandy's civilians lived the battle not as a line advancing on a map, but as days of disruption, danger, relief, grief, and rebuilding even before the battle had ended. The soldiers moving through sometimes saw them only briefly. A face at a window, a woman carrying water, an old man pointing down a road, children watching from behind a gate, a priest walking between houses, a farmer standing beside a damaged cart. These glimpses reminded men that they were not fighting in an empty place. They were in Europe's lived countryside, among people whose language, customs, homes, and losses were real. Sometimes civilians helped with directions. Sometimes they offered water, cider, milk, eggs, or simply a look of relief. Sometimes they were too frightened to come out. Sometimes the fighting was too close. The relationship between armies and civilians in Normandy was complex, shaped by gratitude, fear, destruction, language barriers, and immediate need. A calm script can acknowledge this complexity without becoming heavy. The key is to remain honest and human. As the lodgement grew, the Allies faced the difficult problem of breaking out. They had landed successfully, but they had not yet achieved free movement into France. The Germans still held strong positions. Caen remained difficult. Saint-Lô in the American sector would become another major objective, deeply damaged in the fighting. Cherbourg would be needed for its port, though when captured later in June, the port had been heavily damaged by German demolitions. This is how the campaign lengthens. One objective opens another. Take the beach, then take the road, then take the town, then take the port, then repair the port, then move supplies, then push through hedgerows, then break the front. Nothing ends cleanly. Every success creates the next task. For a viewer, this structure matters. They understand why the video continues. It is not filler. It is history unfolding in layers. D-Day was the opening. The beachhead was the first problem. Supply was the second. The bocage was the next. Caen and Saint-Lô were major obstacles. The breakout was still ahead. Falaise was still ahead. Liberation beyond Normandy was still ahead. The script now points forward without rushing. In a field headquarters, a commander bends over a map. The room may be a farm kitchen, a barn, a tent, or a temporary command post. A lamp glows. Phones and radios connect the room to scattered units. Maps are pinned or spread across tables. A mug sits forgotten. Boots track mud over the floor. Outside, vehicles come and go. Inside, the map shows lines. But the reports tell of hedges, delays, resistance, traffic, casualties, supply shortages, weather, and confusion. The commander is not playing a game. He's trying to make sense of reports that arrive late, incomplete, and sometimes contradictory. A line on the map may look straight. The road itself may be blocked by a crater. A village reported clear may not be fully clear. A unit expected at one place may be somewhere else. The map is necessary. The world resists it. This theme returns again. Map and world, plan and reality, operation and human experience. As night falls on one of those early Normandy days, the front quiets in places and remains active in others. There is no universal night. In one field, men sleep. In another, artillery continues. In one village, civilians emerge. In another, they remain underground. On one road, convoys move. On another, a vehicle burns out silently in the rain. At an aid station, lamps remain on. At a field kitchen, coffee is poured. At a command post, maps are updated. At a beach, ships unload. At Arromanches, engineers and sailors work against tide and weather. In the bocage, a patrol moves slowly along a hedge. In Caen, people wait beneath stone and dust. The Battle of Normandy is many nights at once. For sleep, we can choose one gentle composite night. A Norman field after rain. The hedge dark and wet. A few soldiers resting under a canvas sheet. A truck parked with its engine off. A low lamp inside a farmhouse used as a command post. A radio humming. A medic washing a metal cup. A civilian family in a cellar finally sleeping for an hour. The distant sea still carrying ships toward the beaches. The sky low. The air smelling of wet grass, diesel, smoke and apples. Not peaceful exactly, but calmer than the day. The kind of calm that comes not from safety, but from temporary stillness. Temporary stillness is precious in a campaign. A lull, a pause, a moment when a man can drink, a moment when a nurse can sit, a moment when a driver can sleep against the steering wheel, a moment when a civilian can step outside and see if the house still stands, a moment when the rain covers other sounds, a moment when the mind, too tired to think far ahead, rests in what is near. This is where the story begins to slow. We have moved from the beaches into the countryside. We have seen the bocage, the roads, the civilians, the medics, the engineers, the supply lines, the field kitchens, the radio rooms, the command maps, the waiting around Caen, the slow expansion of the lodgement. Now the campaign will move toward its longer struggle. The next block will carry us deeper into the Battle of Normandy, toward Caen's prolonged battle, toward Saint-Lô and the hard western push, toward the build-up of Allied power, toward the breakout from the hedgerows, toward the closing of the Falaise pocket. But before we go there, let this inland Normandy settle. Let the beaches fade behind. Let the sea remain distant but present. Let the road narrow between hedges. Let the stone farmhouse glow under a covered lamp. Let the aid station become quiet for a moment. Let the convoy rest under soft rain. Let a soldier sleep beside a wall. Let a civilian family breathe more easily for 1 hour in a cellar. Let the landscape become dark green and grey. Hedgerows, apple trees, stone walls, wet roads, church towers, fields divided by ancient banks. The long battle has begun, not with one single dramatic image, but with thousands of small movements through a difficult land. A step from a field into a lane, a truck inching past another, a bridge repaired, a radio message copied, a bandage tied, a map folded, a pot of coffee warmed, a child carried from a cellar into morning light, a soldier looking back once toward the sea, then turning inland again. The Battle of Normandy is now no longer only the story of the landings, it is the story of staying, building, moving, holding, adapting, enduring. The Allied armies have entered France, but the path ahead is still narrow, green, broken, and hard. The bocage waits in the dusk. Caen waits in the east. Saint-Lô waits in the west. The roads wait under dust and rain. The villages wait with closed shutters and tired hearts. And the story moves forward, slowly, from the famous first day into the long, difficult human weeks that followed. The long Battle of Normandy did not move like a clean arrow across a map. It moved like weather through hedgerows, slowly in some places, violently in others, stopping, beginning again, turning around villages, ridgelines, roads, bridges, orchards, ruined towns, and fields divided by ancient green walls. After D-Day, the world knew that the Allies had landed, but landing was only the beginning. Now came the harder question. Could the beachhead become a front? Could the front become a breakout? Could the armies move from the narrow coastal strip into the open country beyond Normandy? Could the promise of June 6th become the liberation of France? For the men on the ground, these questions did not arrive as grand sentences. They arrived as orders in the rain, as a road to be taken, a village to be reached, a hedge to be crossed, a bridge to be repaired, a supply route to be kept open, a field kitchen to be moved forward, a wounded man to be carried back, a radio message to be heard through static, a map to be updated under a low lamp while mud dried on the floor. The Battle of Normandy became a campaign of patience, and patience in war is not passive, it is labour. It is the repeated effort of moving one more yard, clearing one more lane, carrying one more crate, opening one more road, repairing one more bridge, and enduring one more night in a landscape that seemed to resist every plan drawn across it. In the east, Caen remained one of the hardest names of the campaign. The city had been an early objective. It mattered because of its roads, its position, and the more open country beyond it. If Caen could be taken and the ground beyond opened, the Allied armies might have room to manoeuvre. But Caen did not fall quickly. The fighting around it became long, difficult and destructive. British and Canadian forces faced strong German resistance, including armoured formations in and around the city and the villages nearby. The name Caen, spoken in briefings, became weeks of effort. A city of stone, streets, churches, schools, homes and cellars became a battlefield. And inside that battlefield were civilians who had already endured occupation and now endured liberation, arriving through bombardment, fire, dust, and uncertainty. Imagine Caen not as a symbol, but as a city before morning. A room beneath a damaged building, a family sitting close together, a candle burning low, a jug of water, a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, dust on shoulders, a child sleeping with his head in someone's lap because exhaustion is sometimes stronger than fear. Above them, the city has changed shape. Streets that once carried bicycles and market carts now carry tanks, rubble, soldiers, and smoke. A church tower still stands in one place. In another, walls have collapsed. A street sign hangs crooked. Glass lies in the gutter. A curtain moves in a broken window. A woman in a cellar listens and tries to tell whether the sounds are moving closer or farther away. She cannot know the whole battle. She knows only the stones above her, the people beside her, the water left in the jug, and the hope that the next hour will pass. On the Allied side, the soldiers advancing toward Caen experienced the city and its surroundings not as a single objective, but as a series of fields, villages, roads, and strong defensive positions. A British infantryman might remember a wheat field under grey sky. A Canadian tank crewman might remember dust on the road and the shape of a church tower through smoke. A radio operator might remember trying to hear a message while artillery shook the air. A medic might remember a farmhouse used as an aid post, with stretchers in the yard and a Frenchwoman bringing water in a chipped pitcher. The battle for Caen was one of the places where the larger strategy and the human experience met painfully. Strategically, the struggle around Caen fixed large German forces in the east. Humanly, it meant days and nights of danger, exhaustion, and destruction for soldiers and civilians alike. The city was not taken in the first day. It would take weeks, and those weeks mattered. In the west, the Americans faced the bocage and the slow movement towards Saint-Lô. Saint-Lô was a road hub, an important objective in the American sector, but the route toward it passed through some of the most difficult hedgerow country. The fields were small, the banks high, the lanes narrow. The defenders used the terrain well. A unit might spend hours or days fighting for ground that looked small on a map. A crossroads, a farm, a ridgeline, a cluster of houses, a hedge line at the edge of a field. The map might show progress by a short line. For the men there, that line might mean mud, dust, fear, heat, rain, exhaustion, and the repeated act of pushing through another green wall into another uncertain field. Saint-Lô itself would be heavily damaged in the fighting. Like Caen, it was not only an objective, it was a town of people, streets, shops, houses, a cathedral, memories, daily life. The war came through it with terrible force, and after the force passed, the town would have to become a place of memory and rebuilding. But during the campaign, for the men approaching it, Saint-Lô was a name on signs, maps and orders, a place beyond the next ridge, beyond the next lane, beyond the next hedge, a place that seemed close on paper and far in reality. The bocage taught everyone humility. A tank could be powerful and still be stopped by terrain. Infantry could be brave and still be slowed by a single hidden position. Air power could be enormous and still find it difficult to distinguish friend from enemy in enclosed country. Artillery could be devastating and still not solve every hedge, every lane, every village. The terrain divided the battle into small compartments, and so the soldiers learned to fight the land as much as the enemy. They adapted, they improvised. They fitted tanks with devices to cut through hedgerows, sometimes called rhino tanks after the hedge-cutting prongs fixed to the front. They learned to coordinate infantry, armour, artillery, engineers and air support more effectively. They learned that every field had to be respected, every opening watched, every lane cleared, every farm approached with caution. A calm story can pause on the strange quiet before such movement. A unit waits at the edge of a field. The hedge ahead is dense and dark green. Rain has stopped, but the leaves are still wet. A tank idles behind the infantry, its engine low and heavy. A sergeant speaks in a quiet voice. A man adjusts the strap of his helmet. Another wipes mud from his hands. A radio crackles. Somewhere beyond the hedge, nothing can be seen. The field smells of wet earth and crushed grass. For a moment, it could almost be peaceful. Then the men move. History advances one field at a time. Between the eastern struggle around Caen and the western struggle through the bocage, the Allied build-up continued. More men, more vehicles, more artillery, more supplies, more medical units, more airfields, more command posts, more roads repaired, more depots created in fields and orchards. The beachhead became a machine of arrival. Ships still came, landing craft still moved, trucks still rolled from the beaches into the interior. Fuel still had to be brought forward, ammunition still had to be stored, food still had to be cooked, water still had to be delivered, the wounded still had to be moved back, the dead still had to be buried. Every army is a living organism, and Normandy was its difficult body. Roads were veins, convoys were blood, ports and beaches were lungs, radios were nerves, command posts were thinking rooms, field kitchens were small hearts of warmth, aid stations were places where the human cost arrived. Engineers were hands, repairing, clearing, building and opening the way. The soldiers at the front may have felt most visible, but behind them a vast system worked day and night. A truck driver in Normandy might spend long hours in dust or mud, driving along roads crowded with vehicles, stopping, starting, waiting, moving again. He might not know exactly where the front was that day. He might know only the route, the cargo, the next checkpoint, the sound of engines, the taste of dust, the fear of aircraft or shelling, the pressure to keep moving. He may carry ammunition one day, rations the next, medical supplies another, fuel another. His work is not the part of war usually shown in the most dramatic scenes, but without him, the front weakens. A convoy at dusk can be one of the quiet images of the campaign. Canvas-covered trucks lined between hedgerows, engines idling, mud on tyres, a driver sleeping with his head against the steering wheel until the line moves, another man smoking under his coat. Rain beginning again, tapping softly on canvas. A military policeman at a crossroads, his arm raised, guiding the next column forward. A sign painted hastily on a board. No one reads it for poetry. They read it because a wrong turn can lose an hour. An hour can matter. The campaign became full of such hours: waiting hours, driving hours, repairing hours, digging hours, writing hours, sleeping hours stolen in fragments. In an aid station, a nurse or doctor might not see the front, but the front came to them in waves. The aid station could be a tent, a barn, a house, a church hall, or any space made usable by necessity. Lamps glowed late into the night. Water was boiled, bandages were stacked, names were written. Men came in tired, shocked, silent, talking too much, or not talking at all. Medical staff learned to work inside exhaustion. A medic who had been on the beaches might now be inland, moving through fields and roads. A doctor might sleep for 20 minutes on a bench. A nurse might drink cold tea and not remember setting the cup down. A chaplain might sit beside someone who needed no medicine, only a human presence. The Battle of Normandy was fought not only by those who advanced, but by those who cared for the broken. And care in such a campaign had its own discipline. Gentle hands in a rough place, a calm voice, a blanket, a label tied carefully, a stretcher carried through mud, a candle shielded from wind, a person treated as a person, not as a statistic. This too belongs in the story. In the villages, the civilians continued to live inside the battle's movement. Some villages were liberated, then shelled. Some changed hands or remained close to the fighting. Some people hid in cellars for days. Some emerged to find houses damaged, livestock gone, roads blocked, fields dangerous, and soldiers in the streets. Some offered water or cider to Allied troops. Some gave directions. Some wept with relief. Some said nothing because exhaustion had taken all words. A young soldier might remember a French woman standing in a doorway with a bucket of water. A Canadian might remember a child waving shyly from behind a wall. An American might remember an old man pointing toward a road and repeating a name the soldier could not pronounce. A British soldier might remember a village square where the church clock had stopped. The civilians might remember the soldiers as dusty, tired, young, strange, kind, hurried, frightening, welcome, foreign, and human. Liberation was not simple in the first hour. It came with complexity, with gratitude, with grief, with danger, with misunderstanding, with language barriers, with practical needs. The war did not pause so that people could feel one emotion at a time. Hope and fear lived in the same room. The battle for Cherbourg unfolded in the northwest of the Cotentin Peninsula. Cherbourg was important because it was a major port, and the Allies needed ports to sustain the growing forces in France. The drive to Cherbourg followed the Utah landings and the airborne operations that helped secure the Cotentin. When Cherbourg was captured near the end of June, the port facilities had been heavily damaged, and it took time and engineering effort to make the port useful again. This, too, is one of the lessons of Normandy. Capturing a place is not the same as making it function. A port can be in Allied hands and still not be ready. Cranes destroyed, harbour blocked, facilities wrecked, mines, debris, sunken ships, ruined docks. Engineers and naval personnel had to make the port live again. A port is a machine of movement. When it is broken, an army feels the break. So men worked among wreckage, water, metal and concrete, slowly restoring use. Not glamorous, essential. At Arromanches, the Mulberry Harbour continued to be one of the great logistical achievements of the campaign. Massive concrete caissons, floating roadways and pierheads created an artificial port where none had existed. Ships unloaded men and vehicles and supplies under difficult conditions. The harbour rose and fell with the sea. It creaked and strained. Men worked in wet clothing under grey skies with the wind in their faces. The sea had nearly stopped the operation before it began, and after D-Day it continued to test the artificial harbours. A severe storm in mid-June damaged the American Mulberry Harbour at Omaha and caused great disruption. The British Mulberry at Arromanches survived and became crucial. Again, weather became history. A storm is not an enemy commander, but it can change a campaign. Rain, wind, tide, cloud, and mud are not background. They are forces. The soldiers in the fields knew this. The sailors offshore knew it. The pilots knew it. The truck drivers knew it. The nurses in tents knew it when the ground turned to mud beneath their boots. The weather entered everyone's memory. One Normandy evening might be warm and bright with golden light over the fields. The next morning might be damp, grey and cold, Dust could become mud, mud could dry into dust. A soldier might curse both. The battle continued through all of it. As June turned toward July, the campaign grew heavier. The initial excitement of landing gave way to fatigue. Men who had survived D-Day now faced the long endurance of the inland battle. Replacements arrived. Units changed. Officers were lost and replaced. Friends disappeared from mess lines. Letters caught up or failed to. A man might receive a letter written weeks earlier from a peaceful home that seemed to belong to another life. He might read it under a tree, beside a ditch, in the back of a truck, inside a barn, or by the light of a shielded lamp. The letter might mention weather at home, a garden, a child, a street, a mother's health, a small repair needed on a roof. The ordinary world continued elsewhere. That could comfort and hurt at the same time. The soldier folds the letter carefully, places it back in his pocket, returns to the campaign. War makes the ordinary precious. A dry sock, a hot drink, a letter, a shaded place to sleep, a clean bandage, a road sign pointing the right way, a tool that works, a friend still nearby, a moment when the rain stops. In July, the battles around Caen intensified through operations such as Charnwood and Goodwood, part of the prolonged effort to take the city and break through, or pin German armoured forces in the east. The fighting was hard and Caen suffered greatly. Eventually, much of the city came under Allied control, though the battle and destruction around it were severe. For our calm narration, we hold Caen as a place of endurance, a city under a long storm, a city of cellars, a city where people waited under stone while armies moved through streets above, a city whose name became both objective and wound. In the west, the struggle towards Saint-Lô continued, and after hard fighting, Saint-Lô fell to American forces in mid-July. The town was so damaged that it became known as part of the heavy cost of the campaign. From there, the conditions for breakout began to form. The Allies had built up strength. The Germans had been worn down. The lodgement was crowded, tense, and ready for a decisive push. Operation Cobra, launched by the Americans in late July, became the breakout from the western part of the Normandy front. After a massive aerial bombardment, American forces pushed through near Saint-Lô and began to break out of the Bocage country. The fighting remained difficult and confused at first, but the front eventually opened. The slow, enclosed battle of hedgerows began to give way to movement. This transition matters deeply. For weeks, progress had been measured in fields. Now roads began to open into longer advances. Vehicles could move faster. German positions became more difficult to hold. The Allied armies began to move beyond the narrow Normandy lodgement. From a sleep story perspective, we can describe this not as sudden excitement, but as the feeling of a landscape opening after long enclosure. Imagine a soldier who has spent weeks in hedgerows seeing a longer road for the first time. Not perfectly open, not safe, but longer. The horizon visible beyond a field, the road stretching farther than the next hedge. Vehicles moving with more speed. A sense that the battle's shape is changing. The Bocage had held them close. Now the land begins to release them. In the eastern centre, the struggle continued, but the growing Allied pressure and the American breakout in the west began to change the whole campaign. British, Canadian, Polish, and other Allied forces pressed from the north and east, while American forces moved south and east after the breakout. The German armies in Normandy faced increasing danger of encirclement. The story moves now toward Falaise, the Falaise pocket, the closing trap. In August 1944, Allied forces attempted to encircle German forces around Falaise, Chambois, and the surrounding area. The fighting there was severe and chaotic, and many German forces were trapped or destroyed, though some escaped through the gap before it fully closed. The closing of the Falaise pocket marked the effective end of the Battle of Normandy. After that, the road toward Paris and beyond opened more rapidly. But again, we tell this with care. Falaise was not only a tactical outcome. It was a landscape of roads, fields, towns, smoke, refugees, vehicles, soldiers, animals, wreckage, exhaustion, and confusion. It was the end of one campaign and the beginning of another phase of liberation. A road near Falaise in August would have looked very different from the quiet lanes of early June. Dry dust, summer heat, vehicles abandoned or destroyed, civilians fleeing or sheltering, soldiers moving under pressure, Allied aircraft overhead, Polish, Canadian, American, British, and other Allied units pressing the closing ring. German forces trying to escape eastward. the landscape filled with the aftermath of weeks of fighting. It is one of the heavier parts of the Normandy story, and we do not need to dwell on its harshest images. We can say enough. The pocket closed. The German position in Normandy collapsed. The campaign that began in darkness over the Channel reached its turning point in the fields and roads around Falaise. The cost had been enormous. For soldiers on all sides, for civilians, for towns and villages, for the land itself. By late August, the Allies were breaking out across France. Paris would be liberated soon after. The Battle of Normandy, as a campaign, had achieved its purpose. The Allies had established a foothold, expanded it, endured the German response, broken through the bocage, and opened the road into France. But the victory was not clean or painless. It had taken weeks of hard fighting, vast resources, and profound loss. The Normandy that remained behind was changed. Fields marked by tracks and craters, villages damaged, roads filled with signs of passage, cemeteries growing, families counting who had survived, soldiers moving onward, often without time to understand what they had just lived through. This is another truth of campaigns. The army moves on before memory can settle. A man who fought in the bocage may be ordered east. A nurse who worked near the front may move to another hospital. A truck driver who spent nights on Normandy roads now drives toward the next city. A civilian watches columns pass and realizes the battle has moved beyond the village. The place is left with the memory before the world has language for it. Imagine a quiet evening after the front has moved on. A Norman village at dusk. Dust still in the road, a broken wall, a church bell silent or ringing again for the first time, a woman sweeping a threshold, a child stepping carefully around debris, a soldier's ration tin left near a hedge, a field trampled by vehicles, an orchard with branches broken, a cow returning slowly to a pasture, the distant sound of guns moving farther away. The air smells of dust, smoke, leaves, and evening. For the first time in many days, perhaps, the village hears its own small sounds again. A bucket, a door, a voice, a bird. This is not peace yet. Not fully, but it is a first quiet. The soldiers who moved on carried Normandy with them. Maybe not as a complete story, maybe only as fragments. A rough sea before dawn, the ramp of a landing craft, the green wall of a hedgerow, the dust of Saint-Lô, the ruins of Caen, a French woman offering water, a medic under a lamp, a friend asleep beside a road, a field at dusk, a road opening after weeks of enclosure. The mind keeps fragments because the whole is too large. The script too keeps fragments, not to avoid the facts, but to make the facts human. D-Day and the Battle of Normandy were vast. Operation Overlord was vast. But history becomes meaningful through small points of contact. A hand, a map, a road, a cup, a field, a letter, a lamp, a bridge, a name spoken quietly. By the end of the campaign, the geography of Normandy had become a geography of memory. Utah, Omaha, gold, Juno, sword, Sainte-Mère-Église, Pegasus Bridge, Arromanches, Caen, Saint-Lô, Cherbourg, the Bocage, Falaise. Each name holds military meaning. Each name also holds human meaning. A place where someone waited, a place where someone landed, a place where someone hid, a place where someone helped, a place where someone never returned, a place rebuilt, a place remembered. As this block closes, the Battle of Normandy is nearing its end. The beachhead has become a breakout. The hedgerows have been crossed. Caen has endured. Saint-Lô has fallen. Cobra has opened the front. Falaise has closed around the German forces. The Allied armies are moving out of Normandy and into the rest of France. The campaign has done what it needed to do, but the land remains behind, carrying the cost. The next and final part of the story will not rush forward into more operations. It will slow down. It will return to Normandy after the fighting, to the beaches under quieter skies, to the fields where grass grows back, to cemeteries with white stones, to villages rebuilt, to rain on old roads, to the memory of those who crossed the Channel and those who waited under occupation, to the idea that history, after all its noise, asks for silence. For now, let the long campaign settle. The road from D-Day to Falaise has been travelled, from the dark Channel to the grey beaches, from the beaches to the bocage, from the bocage to Caen and Saint-Lô, from Saint-Lô to the breakout, from the breakout to the closing of the pocket. The story has moved through maps, but it has also moved through weather, fields, cellars, aid stations, convoys, letters, and human fatigue. Let the images soften. A truck idling in a sunken lane, a field kitchen steaming under rain, a radio operator listening in a farmhouse, a medic folding a blanket, a civilian opening a shutter after the front has moved, a soldier asleep against a stone wall, a tank with hedgerow cutters moving through a green bank, a road sign pointing towards St. Lo, a church tower beyond smoke, a long line of vehicles moving toward the east. The battle is not yet memory, but it is becoming memory. The armies move on, the land remains, and over Normandy, after weeks of dust, rain, smoke, and waiting, the evening sky lowers softly over fields that have seen too much and will, in time, grow quiet again. After the armies moved beyond Normandy, the land did not become quiet all at once. Silence returned slowly, first in small places, a field at dusk, a lane after the last convoy had passed, a churchyard where the dust began to settle, a beach where the tide moved in and out as it had always done, covering tracks, touching obstacles, smoothing the sand, and then drawing back again under the grey sky. The Battle of Normandy had ended as a campaign, but the region remained full of traces, wheel marks in fields, broken walls, bridges repaired in haste, orchards damaged by shell fire, roads widened by military traffic, farmhouses changed by occupation, liberation, and battle, villages where windows were patched with boards, towns where streets had to be cleared stone by stone, cellars where families had waited, barns that had become aid stations, fields that had become temporary camps, fields that had become burial grounds. The armies moved eastward, toward Paris, toward Belgium, toward Germany, toward the next phase of the war. But Normandy remained behind, carrying the weight of June, July, and August 1944. And in this final part of the story, we let the movement slow. We leave the rushing convoys, we leave the tactical arrows, we leave the front line as it moves away, and we stay with the land. Because after every great battle, there is a quieter story, the story of what remains, the story of fields returning to grass, of roads being cleared, of families stepping out from cellars, of church bells tested again, of letters sent and received, of names written down, of cemeteries marked, of villages beginning, carefully, to breathe. The beaches were still there, Utah, Omaha. Gold, Juno, Sword. The names that had been shouted in briefings, printed on maps, carried in sealed orders, whispered in landing craft and remembered by men for the rest of their lives. After the fighting moved inland and then beyond Normandy, the beaches returned to weather. The tide continued. The gulls circled. Rain came and went. Morning light spread across wet sand. At low tide, the beaches widened. At high tide, the sea climbed back toward the dunes and seawalls. The channel did not remember in the way people remember. It moved, it breathed, it rose and fell. And yet, for anyone who stood there afterward, the beaches could never be only beaches again. A quiet morning at Omaha could hold more silence than sound. The bluffs above, the long sand below, the water moving steadily, the sky pale, wind crossing from the sea. A person standing there years later might hear almost nothing but waves and still feel that the silence was full. At Utah, the low coastline and the causeways behind it seemed peaceful again in time. Grass grew, birds returned, roads became roads again. The fields behind the beach, once filled with confusion, movement and danger, became fields of farming, memory and wind. At Gold, the shoreline near Arromanches held the remains of the artificial harbour. The Mulberry Harbour, built from engineering imagination and urgency, became one of the most visible reminders that the invasion was not only a landing, but a sustained effort to bring an army ashore and keep it alive. Concrete caissons remained offshore, dark shapes in the water. They looked almost like ruins from an older civilization, though they belonged to the modern war. At low tide or in certain light, they appeared solemn and quiet, touched by waves, gulls, and weather. The harbour had served its purpose. Now it rested. At Juneau, Canadian memory remained strong. The beach where men from far across the Atlantic came ashore became a place of remembrance, not only for those who landed, but for the country that had sent them. The towns behind the beach returned gradually to ordinary life, but memory remained in plaques, museums, stones, ceremonies, and family stories. At Sword, the road inland toward Caen and the bridges remembered both the seaborne forces and the airborne operations that had helped hold the eastern flank. Pegasus Bridge became a name that carried a small, precise story inside the larger one. A bridge, a glider, a night landing, a held crossing, a link between air, land, and sea. Each place in Normandy became layered. A village was a village, and also a battlefield. A road was a road, and also an advance route. A bridge was a bridge, and also an objective. A field was a field, and also a place where someone landed, waited, fought, slept, or never left. This is how history settles into geography. It does not replace the ordinary world, it lives beneath it. A farmer opens a gate, a child walks to school, rain falls on a roof, a church bell rings, and somewhere beneath all of that, the memory remains. In the weeks and months after the battle, the practical work of recovery began. People cleared debris, repaired houses, recovered belongings, searched for missing family members, rebuilt roads, buried the dead, marked graves, removed dangers from fields where children might one day play again, restored wells, mended roofs, shared food, found livestock, wrote letters, waited for news. Life after battle is not a single emotional moment. It is work, slow work, hard work, ordinary work made sacred by necessity. A woman sweeping a floor where dust keeps falling, a man repairing a door with mismatched wood, a child carrying water from a pump, a priest recording names, a farmer looking at a field and wondering when it will be safe to plough, a mother unfolding a blanket that has been used in a cellar for weeks, a neighbour helping another neighbour because the roof is gone, a village beginning again, one small repair at a time. The soldiers too carried Normandy forward. Some remained for a while, some moved on quickly, some were wounded and evacuated. Some returned home later with memories they could not easily speak. Some wrote letters from the next place, mentioning only that they were safe for now. Some remembered Normandy as fear, some as mud, some as exhaustion, some as friendship, some as the place where a friend died, some as the first sight of France, some as a field of apple trees, some as the sound of a landing craft ramp, some as the smell of hedgerows after rain. Memory does not preserve events in neat order, it keeps fragments. A grey dawn, a road sign, a church tower, a field kitchen, a French child, a medic's voice, a beach obstacle, a sudden silence, a cup of coffee, a night in a barn, the rough bark of an apple tree against a tired back, a letter from home folded and unfolded until the paper softened. The official history of Normandy remembers dates and operations. June 6th, the landings, the linking of the beachheads, Cherbourg, Caen, Saint-Lô, Operation Cobra, the Falaise Pocket, the breakout. Those are important. They give structure. They help us understand what happened. But private memory holds other dates. The day a man first saw the sea from a landing craft. The night he slept in a ditch and woke under rain. The morning he heard church bells again. The hour he found his unit after being separated. The minute a civilian handed him water. The last conversation with a friend. The first hot meal after days of cold rations. The moment he realised the front had moved and he was still alive. These memories are not always written in books, but they are part of the story. The untold story of Normandy is not a single hidden fact. It is the countless quiet human details that official maps cannot fully hold. The roads behind the beaches, the medics under lamps, the engineers in mud, the civilians in cellars, the sailors still unloading supplies after the first day, the truck drivers following dusty routes through hedgerows, the paratroopers trying to find one another in the dark, the Canadians pushing inland from Juneau, the British and commandos moving from Sword toward their objectives, the Americans struggling through Omaha and Utah into the countryside beyond, the people of Caen and Saint-Lô living through destruction and survival, the Polish, Canadian, British, American, and other Allied troops pressing the closing ring around Falaise, the names that became history because ordinary people endured them. As the years passed, Normandy became a place of pilgrimage. Veterans returned, families came, historians walked the ground, visitors stood on beaches that were now calm, children played not far from places where the world had once seemed to break open. Museums collected objects, helmets, maps, letters, photographs, uniforms, pieces of equipment, each object small, each object carrying a trace. A helmet becomes not only metal, but rain, sand, fear, and survival. A map becomes not only paper, but a plan and a memory. A letter becomes not only handwriting, but a voice reaching across distance. A boot, a canteen, a compass, a patch, a spoon, a prayer book, a ration tin. War leaves objects behind, and people ask those objects to help them remember what cannot be fully imagined. The cemeteries of Normandy are among the quietest parts of the story. Rows of white crosses or stars, green grass, low walls, flags moving softly in wind, names, dates, unknowns, the sky wide above, the sea not far away. Visitors walk slowly there. Even those who do not know anyone buried in those grounds often lower their voices without being told. The place itself teaches quiet. At the American cemetery above Omaha, the sea can be seen beyond the graves. That view carries a deep stillness. The beach below, the water beyond, the rows of markers, the long distance between the lives that ended there and the lives that continue to visit. At British, Canadian, German, Polish, and other cemeteries throughout Normandy, the same gravity remains. Different nations, different uniforms. Different histories, young men under the same sky. The cemeteries do not need dramatic language, they ask for silence, and in a sleep story, silence matters. Not empty silence, remembering silence. The kind of silence that lets the mind settle, not because the history was gentle, but because it is being held with care. After the battle, Normandy slowly returned to seasons. Autumn came, then winter. Rain softened the fields, grass grew over scars, roads were repaired, hedges leafed out again, apple trees flowered in later springs, cows returned to pastures, churches were rebuilt or restored, children grew up hearing stories from parents and grandparents. Some stories were told often, some rarely, some never. The land did not forget, but it did not remain frozen in the summer of 1944. It became living land again. That may be one of the deepest forms of remembrance. Not to keep a place forever in the moment of destruction, but to allow it to live while knowing what happened there. A field can grow wheat and hold memory. A beach can receive swimmers and hold memory. A village square can host a market and hold memory. A church bell can ring for Sunday and hold memory. Life returns, and memory remains underneath. Imagine Normandy many years later on a rainy evening. The sky is soft grey. The fields are deep green. Water gathers along narrow roads. The hedgerows are wet and dark. A church tower rises from a village. A few warm lights glow behind windows. The sea moves beyond the dunes. At Arromanches, the old harbour remains sit offshore, touched by tide. At Omaha, the waves fold and unfold along the sand. At Juneau, rain darkens the seawall. At Utah, grass bends in the wind. At Sword, the road inland is quiet. The names are still there. The places are still there. But the sound is different. No engines now. No landing craft. No shouted commands. Only rain, wind, waves. The occasional car passing on a road. A church bell, a door closing. A gull calling. The ordinary sounds of a place that survived. This is where the story can begin to become deeply restful. The history has been told. The operation has unfolded. The landing has happened. The beaches have been crossed. The bocage has been entered. Caen and Saint-Lô have endured. Cherbourg has been taken and repaired. Cobra has broken through. Falaise has closed. The armies have moved on. And now Normandy rests under rain. The listener does not need to carry the whole campaign anymore. The facts can soften into landscape. D-Day becomes the dark channel before dawn. Operation Overlord becomes maps under low lamps. The beaches become 5 names whispered by the tide. The bocage becomes wet green hedges along a quiet road. Caen becomes a city rebuilt, its stones holding memory. Saint-Lô becomes a town that suffered and rose again. Falaise becomes fields where the campaign reached its end. And all of Normandy becomes a place where history and ordinary life meet under the same sky. Let the images slow, a landing craft fading into memory, a paratrooper descending into darkness, then becoming only a white shape in the night, a glider near a bridge, then only a quiet field, a beach under grey light, a medic's lamp, a field kitchen steaming in rain, a convoy waiting in a lane, a letter folded in a pocket, a church tower at dusk, a civilian opening a shutter after the front has passed, an apple tree moving in the wind, a cemetery above the sea, a wave smoothing sand. The story began before dawn when the coast was hidden. It moved across the channel. It arrived at the beaches. It entered the bocage. It passed through villages, roads, cellars and fields. It followed the long campaign toward breakout and memory. Now it returns to quiet. The sea is no longer filled with invasion craft in this final image. It is simply the channel under a soft night sky. Dark water moving between England and France. The same water that once carried thousands of men now reflects moonlight, cloud, and the faint shimmer of distant coastlines. A ship far away moves slowly, peaceful and small. The waves rise and fall, rise and fall, rise and fall. The rhythm is older than history, older than war, older than the names on maps. It was there before Operation Overlord. It was there on D-Day. It is there now. The waves do not erase memory. They carry it gently. On the Normandy shore, rain begins again. Not heavy rain. A fine, soft rain that darkens the sand and gathers on grass. It taps on the roofs of houses rebuilt after the war. It falls on quiet lanes. It touches the leaves of hedgerows. It beads on cemetery stones. It gathers in the cracks of old walls. It runs down the sides of monuments. It falls on fields where cows graze, and children will one day walk without knowing every detail of what happened beneath their feet. The rain is not sad exactly. It is cleansing, patient, soft. It makes the world shine in low light. A village at night glows warmly through curtained windows. Inside one house, a kettle sits on a stove. A table is set. A clock ticks. A chair waits beside the hearth. The war is history now, but the house is alive. This is what was fought for. Not glory, not spectacle, but rooms where people can sit safely, fields that can be planted, children who can sleep without fear of aircraft overhead, roads that can be travelled for ordinary reasons, church bells that can ring for weddings, markets, funerals, Sundays, and time itself. The story of Normandy ends not only with victory, but with the return of ordinary life. Ordinary life is easy to overlook until it has been threatened. A dry bed, a warm lamp, a loaf of bread, a quiet road, a letter delivered, a family at a table, a window opened in the morning, a field cut for hay, a bicycle leaned against a wall, a child walking to school. These are small things. But history exists in part so that small things may continue. Tonight's story has moved through difficult history, but it has always searched for the human and the quiet. The man in the landing craft holding a letter, the paratrooper in the wet field, the medic under a lamp, the civilian in the cellar, the engineer at the bridge, the truck driver in the lane, the nurse with cold tea, the commander over a map, the soldier asleep beside a hedgerow, the village woman sweeping glass from a doorstep, the cemetery caretaker walking slowly between rows, the veteran returning years later, standing quietly above the beach, not saying much because some memories are too large for speech. If you are still awake, you may let the story become softer now. You do not need to hold the chronology. You do not need to remember each operation. You do not need to name every beach or town. Let the facts become a calm landscape. D-Day, Operation Overlord, Normandy, the Channel, the beaches, the fields, the hedgerows, the villages, the long road inland, the rain, the memory. Let each word appear, then fade. D-Day, a grey dawn, Operation Overlord. A map under a lamp, Normandy, green fields and stone villages, the Channel, dark water, the beaches, sand and tide, the bocage, hedges and quiet lanes, Caen, stone and endurance, Saint-Lô, rubble and rebuilding, Falaise, the closing of a campaign, memory, white stones under a wide sky. The rain continues softly. It falls on Utah. It falls on Omaha. It falls on Gold. It falls on Juneau. It falls on Sword. It falls on farm roads and church roofs. It falls on fields where the grass has returned. It falls on old stones and new houses. It falls on the sea, where each drop disappears into something larger. This is a good image for sleep. Rain disappearing into the sea. A small sound joining a larger silence. A single drop becoming part of dark water. a thought becoming part of rest. Let the story do the same. Let the names drift into quiet. Let the maps fold themselves. Let the landing craft become shadows. Let the engines fade. Let the roads empty. Let the fields darken gently. Let the cemeteries remain peaceful beneath the sky. Let Normandy rest. There is nothing more you need to follow now. The campaign has ended. The armies have moved on. The villages have begun again. The tide continues. The rain falls softly. The night is calm. You can imagine yourself standing far from the noise of history on a quiet Normandy road after rain. The hedgerows are dark on either side. The air smells of wet leaves, stone, grass, and distant sea. A small light glows in a farmhouse window. No one is hurrying. No one is shouting. The road curves gently ahead and disappears into a deeper shade of green. Somewhere beyond the fields, the channel moves under cloud. Somewhere behind you, the past remains, honoured but no longer loud. You breathe. The night breathes. The land is quiet. The story has done what it came to do. It has carried you from darkness before dawn across the sea through the beaches into the long inland battle, and finally back to stillness. Now the words can become slower, softer, more distant. The sea, the rain, the hedgerows, the road, the lamp, the field, the tide, the breath, the sea, the rain, the hedgerows, the road, the lamp, the field, the tide, the breath. Again and again, the same quiet things. No more operations, no more maps, no more movement to track, only Normandy at night, after rain, only the waves on the shore, only a low lamp behind a window, only the memory of those who crossed the water, only the green fields growing back, only the silence that follows when history has been spoken gently and placed carefully down. Let your shoulders soften, let your hands rest, let your eyes become heavy, let the breath come in and go out without effort, like the tide, like rain, like the slow movement of clouds over the channel. The story is ending now, not with a sudden stop, but with a fading. The beach fades into mist, the road fades into shadow, the church tower fades into night, the fields fade into deep green, the sea fades into dark blue, the rain becomes softer, the lamp becomes smaller, the names become quiet. Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword, D-Day, Normandy, Memory, Rest. The past is safe to leave for tonight. It will remain where it belongs, in books, in fields, in cemeteries, in museums, in family stories, in the names carved in stone, in the waves that continue to touch the shore. You do not need to keep watch over it now. The watch has been kept. The story has been told. The night is peaceful. The coast is quiet. The rain is soft. The sea is steady. And you may drift now, deeper and slower, into the calm after the story, where the sounds grow distant, the images grow gentle, and the long road through Normandy becomes only a quiet path into sleep.